I wanted to support my husband, even if his mom treated me poorly like a servant, and even if he didn't stand up for me. But things changed when his favorite brother got hurt and became half paralyzed. My husband started making fun of him, and even teamed up with his mom to make fun of me. That's when I decided I wouldn't take it anymore. Holding my brother-in-law's hand, I promised to get back at my husband and mother-in-law. My name's Mia, and I live with my husband Kent while we work together. I feel really overwhelmed because I have a ton of work to do at home and with my job, and I never get any time for myself. It's because my in-laws, who live nearby, keep asking for my help. Even though my husband and I both work, he never helps with the housework. My mother-in-law treats me more like a maid than a daughter-in-law. Mia, today you need to take your brother-in-law to the hospital. My mother-in-law calls me early in the morning on my day off. I'm supposed to take care of my brother-in-law's daily needs when I'm not working. Before, I was basically forced to drive him around like a taxi, but now I'm looking after him because he's half paralyzed. I'm always sorry, Mia, my brother-in-law said apologetically, but I shook my head. I'm doing it because I want to, so please don't worry, I replied smiling, but his expression seemed troubled. Before the accident, he was my mother-in-law's favorite. He graduated from a great university, landed a job at a big company, and was kind and gentle to everyone. It seemed like my mother-in-law only had eyes for him, as if he were her only son, leaving my husband, the second son, feeling ignored. Sometimes I got mad at my mother-in-law for treating my husband unfairly. That's why I always wanted to support him. But things changed drastically when my brother-in-law, who used to be so successful, ended up in a wheelchair after the accident. I honestly wish you'd leave already. Being disabled and unable to earn money is bringing shame to the family. My mother-in-law's words were harsh, considering all the help my brother-in-law had given us. She treated him like he didn't belong, which was incredibly cruel. And to make it worse, my husband started joining in, mocking my brother-in-law along with my mother-in-law. So he's paralyzed and can't even move a hand, huh? Doesn't matter if you went to a fancy university, once you can't walk, it's all downhill from there, right? When I thought about my brother-in-law, unable to move his legs because of the accident, I couldn't fathom how they could say such things. Unlike my mother-in-law, my brother-in-law was kind to my husband too. But despite that, my husband's remarks only made things harder for my brother-in-law. After all the hospital visits, I hope he'll move out soon. We can take care of my mom ourselves, and he's just a burden now, a disabled person who can't contribute anything. My husband's words were hurtful, and I found myself arguing with him. I reminded him of all the things my brother-in-law had done for us in the past, and that his injuries were just the result of a terrible accident. We shouldn't speak about him like that, especially since he treated my husband equally. I also opened up about how I'd been treated by my mother-in-law all this time. I endured verbal abuse and was made to run errands on my days off. But I went along with it because I hoped my mother-in-law would change her attitude toward my husband and maybe even acknowledge me a little. But no matter how much I pleaded, my husband didn't seem to understand. Since my brother-in-law's accident, my husband suddenly became the priority for my mother-in-law, who used to dismiss him. It was understandable that he'd feel happy about it, but for me, I just couldn't relate. The sudden and extreme change in her attitude was shocking. My mother-in-law was never easy to deal with, but I never expected my husband to change so drastically. Looking back, my husband often left all the household chores to me, but I believed he was making efforts in his own way. That's why his sudden change in attitude was so shocking and upsetting. One day, while feeling frustrated with my husband and mother-in-law, my husband suggested a family trip. I was thinking we could go to Hawaii for a change of scenery and have some fun, he said. As a working couple, we could afford a trip, but what about my brother-in-law who couldn't join us? Would he be left alone at home? When I voiced my concerns, I learned that a helper would be hired while we were away. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of guilt for my brother-in-law and started worrying if I could even enjoy the trip. A little something to look forward to wouldn't hurt, my brother-in-law said a few days later, sensing my struggle with my husband's idea. I heard about the trip. Don't worry about me, go and enjoy yourself. You've always been there for me during the hospital visits and everything else. It's time for you to relax and have some fun. His kindness touched me, and I joked that going on a trip with my husband and mother-in-law might be more exhausting than usual, which made my brother-in-law laugh. Encouraged by his words, I told my husband we should go ahead with the trip, and we began preparing for our Hawaii adventure. I took charge of planning the itinerary and dealing with the travel agency. My mother-in-law kept changing her hotel and activity preferences, making it a bit challenging to finalize the plans. But finally, 2 weeks before our departure, everything for our Hawaii trip was set. As soon as we landed in Hawaii, I made a decision to separate from my husband and mother-in-law. I had already felt used even before the trip, so I had planned for this moment. Plus, I needed some time alone, which I had been longing for since the days leading up to our departure. Most of my effort went into helping my mother-in-law prepare for the trip. I'd rush to buy the things she needed after work, and on my days off, I'd take her to the store so she could pick out what she wanted. These shopping trips with my mother-in-law would easily take up 4 hours each time. The 2 weeks before our departure were packed with this and assisting my brother-in-law with his hospital visits. Then, on the day of the trip, my husband and mother-in-law chuckled and told me, "You stay and take care of your brother." Those words left me speechless and utterly stunned. "Since I usually take care of my son, this time it's your turn. Hiring a helper costs money, but you do it for free," my husband and mother-in-law joked, laughing it off. Their demeanor left me feeling no anger anymore. They left for the airport without me, and I stood frozen in place even after their car vanished from sight. Once back home, I used the spare key to enter my in-laws' house. I found my brother-in-law lying down in the living room and told him about what had just occurred. "I'm sorry for suggesting the trip, but I never imagined it would turn out like this," I told my apologetic brother-in-law, reassuring him that this outcome was probably for the best. I hadn't expected much from my mother-in-law to begin with, but this incident also revealed my husband's true colors. I struggled to put my feelings into words, but at that point, I didn't really care anymore. As I glanced down at my brother-in-law's immobile lower body and left hand, I suddenly saw him rise to his feet. It was shocking because he wasn't supposed to be able to move like that. "What's happening? How are you standing?" I blurted out in surprise. Unable to contain my astonishment, I asked my brother-in-law, who then explained that he wasn't permanently paralyzed. It turns out he had been wanting to put an end to my mother-in-law's excessive interference for a while. He had chosen to stay at the family home because he couldn't afford to live on his own. "I'm barely making ends meet," he explained. When my mother-in-law insisted on him staying, he felt pressured to comply, fearing it might cause trouble for my husband and me. "My mother spends money recklessly. I thought my life would be ruined if things continued like this." I was naive at the time of the accident, he admitted. He had been contemplating how to break free from his mother's hold without causing issues for us. The turning point came when he pretended to be paralyzed and unable to walk. That's when my mother-in-law's attitude towards him changed. And just as he was wondering what to do next, my mother-in-law began favoring my husband. Listening to his story, I couldn't help but feel genuinely sorry for my brother-in-law. "It's really frustrating, isn't it?" I replied with a wry smile, and my brother-in-law returned the smile. "Well, shall we fight back then? What do you think? You can join in, Mia," he suggested. I had no intention of letting things end like this. This whole situation had disgusted me with my husband and mother-in-law. So of course I agreed to my brother-in-law's proposal. 1 week later, my mother-in-law and husband returned from Hawaii. As soon as they arrived home, my husband called me. "Hey, where are my things?" The apartment was empty when I got back. I explained that I had sent his belongings to my in-laws' house. "I made it so you can live with your mother like you've always wanted," I tearfully told him. But instead of understanding, he started complaining about how I moved his stuff without permission. Ignoring his reaction, I told him I want a divorce. "This is too selfish." He was taken aback, demanding to know what had come over me and who was the selfish one. Finally finding my voice, I confronted him about his betrayal of my trust and how much I had endured for him. And during the preparations for the move, even more of his wrongdoing came to light. It turns out he was secretly giving money to my mother-in-law without telling me. Looking back, my mother-in-law's extravagant shopping habits continued even after my brother-in-law quit his job. I had always assumed he was the one funding her spending, but it turns out he had significantly cut back on his expenses after leaving his job. That meant my mother-in-law must have been getting money from someone else, and the only likely candidate was my husband. "You need to repay the money you've been spending without my knowledge," I know $22,000 had gone missing in the past few months, I told him firmly. In response, my husband offered weak excuses, but nothing he said seemed to justify what he had done. Realizing that everything I said was true, he couldn't come up with any valid reasons. I informed him that my brother-in-law had already moved out, and I was living in a new place. I made it clear that neither my brother-in-law nor I wanted anything to do with him or his mother anymore. It's best for you to go live with your parents. Your family seems to only consist of your mother-in-law, right? I said before hanging up, but my husband's angry voice cut through. You're so insolent. I should have divorced you long ago, just like my mother said, he shouted. Even in that moment, he brought up his mother. Though it was my honest feeling, his words felt like a relief. His straightforward declaration of divorce was appreciated. Shortly after, a pre-filled divorce form arrived from my husband's end. I submitted it to the city office and sorted out the financial matters swiftly. Finally, I was free, but this was just the beginning. I submitted the divorce papers. I informed him over the phone. His response was curt. Now that I don't have a nagging wife and a disabled brother around, things will be much better for me. This is the best outcome, huh? He laughed. I laughed too, adding, your brother-in-law has semi-retired and is enjoying life abroad. And did you know he wasn't actually paralyzed? Oh, and your mother-in-law has some debts, so good luck with that. I thought I heard him say, huh. But I hung up, blocked his number, and decided he was just a stranger now, someone I didn't need to care about anymore. A month later, I received a letter from my ex-husband, Kent, sent through a lawyer. The letter was a mix of complaints, apologies, and an unthinkable proposal to remarry me. I'd often wish you were still with me. My salary alone can't support my mother anymore. It's impossible, he lamented in the letter. It was filled with such absurd concerns, and I could almost sense the traces of tears in his words, which made me feel nauseous. I promptly threw the letter away. It appeared that my ex-husband had lost all his assets trying to repay my mother-in-law's debts. Yet it wasn't enough, and they ended up losing the family home. As for my mother-in-law, she was desperately searching for my brother-in-law, who had gone overseas. According to my brother-in-law, she had been reaching out to his acquaintances and former colleagues. Despite her efforts, none of them intended to disclose his whereabouts. And even if she did find out, she wouldn't be able to go there. This situation was putting my second son at risk. I want to see my older son, she reportedly said, but none of my brother-in-law's acquaintances were willing to help her. It seems that life with Kent has been quite challenging for my mother-in-law since the divorce. Meanwhile, I've been enjoying a peaceful life in my new single-person apartment. It's remarkably calm compared to the chaos of before. It's been a year since the divorce, and for the last 6 months, I haven't heard a word from my ex-husband. Then today, I received an email from my brother-in-law abroad after a long silence. The email contained news that my mother-in-law had finally gone bankrupt, her name even listed in the official Gazette. Curious, I did some digging and discovered that Kent and my mother-in-law are now cohabiting in a small one-room apartment. Needless to say, they're not getting along. Kent is struggling to make ends meet and is drowning in debt, all because of my mother-in-law's uncontrollable spending habits. The sight of them disgusts me, but strangely, recalling the past doesn't fill me with anger anymore. It seems the revenge my brother-in-law and I carried out, what we called a counterattack, has had more than enough effect.
The party was already in full swing when I got there, music blasting and people everywhere, laughing and dancing. My friend Sarah's place was known for these blowouts, but tonight felt different. Maybe because I wasn't really in the mood for partying, considering the rough week at the dental clinic, dealing with patients who thought flossing was a suggestion rather than a necessity. I was nursing my drink, kinda zoning out, when he walked over. "Seems like you're not enjoying the party much," he said, his voice cutting through the noise. I looked up, a bit taken aback. He was older, probably in his early 40s, with that kind of distinguished look that some men seem to grow into. "Just tired," I admitted, forcing a smile. "Rough week at work." He laughed, a hearty sound that made a few heads turn. "Tell me about it. I'm Mark, by the way." "Laura," I said, shaking his hand. It was warm, his grip firm. "So, Laura, what brings you to this madhouse?" he asked, glancing around at the party chaos. "Sarah's a friend from college. And you?" I was curious. He didn't seem like the usual crowd here. I've known Sarah's uncle for years. Promised I'd show my face, he explained. We found ourselves a quieter corner and started talking. Turned out, Mark was into finance, something with stocks, which usually would bore me to tears, but the way he talked about it was kind of fascinating. And funny, too. He had this way of making even the driest topics seem interesting. At some point, he mentioned his upcoming birthday, almost as an afterthought. It's actually this coming Thursday. Another year closer to oblivion, he joked, a mock toast with his drink. Happy early birthday, then. I'll have to get you a present, I said, playing along with the jest. He raised an eyebrow, a smile playing on his lips. Oh, really? Well, I wouldn't say no to that. How about you join me for dinner? Consider it my birthday present. I laughed, thinking he was continuing the joke. Sure, why not? Beats spending your birthday alone, right? To my surprise, he took out his phone. Great. Let me get your number, and I'll send you the details. That's how I ended up agreeing to a dinner for Mark's birthday, barely an hour after meeting him. It was impulsive, sure, but there was something about him, something that made me want to say yes. The night of the dinner came quicker than I thought. It was at this cozy little restaurant downtown, just the right kind of place for a birthday dinner. Mark was already there, waiting with a smile that made my heart do a weird flip. Happy birthday, I said, handing him a small, wrapped gift. It was just a book I thought he'd like, nothing fancy. He looked genuinely touched, opening it with a care that made me feel. I don't know, special, I guess. This is perfect, Laura. Thank you. Dinner was amazing. We talked about everything and nothing, from our jobs to the crazy ways of the world. And the more we talked, the more I realized I was enjoying myself, enjoying his company. It was late when we finally left the restaurant. Thanks for a great birthday, Laura. It's been a long time since I've enjoyed one like this, Mark said, his voice sincere. I felt a warmth spread through me at his words. I'm glad I could make it special. Happy birthday, Mark. Who knew a simple birthday dinner could kick off a whirlwind like the one Mark and I found ourselves in? Not me, that's for sure. After that night, we started seeing each other more and more. It wasn't long before those casual dates turned into something that felt a lot like, well, like something serious. One chilly evening, we were walking down the street after grabbing a bite at this little dive that Mark loved. He was going on about something funny that happened at his office, his laughter echoing in the cool air. Suddenly, Mark stopped walking and turned to me, his expression serious all of a sudden. Laura, I've been thinking. Yeah? I prompted, a bit taken aback by the sudden shift in mood. I'm really happy with you. Like, really happy. And I was wondering. What do you think about us moving in together? He blurted out, his gaze fixed on me. I felt my heart skip a beat. Moving in together? That was a big step. Mark, I'm happy too, really happy. But don't you think it's a bit soon? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He took my hands in his eyes earnest. Maybe it is, but when something feels this right, why wait? I love you, Laura. And I want us to start building something together. His words sent a wave of warmth through me. Love. He'd said he loved me. And the crazy part? I realized I loved him too. Okay, I said, the word coming out in a whisper. Let's do it. Let's move in together. The smile that lit up Mark's face was worth any doubt or fear I might have had. From that night on, things moved quickly. We found a cozy apartment not too far from where I worked. Packing up my stuff and moving in with Mark felt like the start of a new chapter. It wasn't all smooth sailing, of course. Combining two lives into one space came with its fair share of bumps. Like the time I discovered Mark's insistence on keeping his ancient, ugly recliner right in the middle of our living room. I replied that in return I would put my neon pink flamingo lamp in the room. It was these little moments, these little compromises, that made us stronger, I think. We were figuring it out together, learning to give and take. Then came the talk of marriage. We were lying in bed one night, just talking about everything and nothing, when Mark suddenly turned to me. "Laura, marry me." It wasn't a question, more like a statement. No kneeling, no ring in hand, just him and me, and his words hanging in the air between us. I looked into his eyes, saw the love and the seriousness there, and knew my answer. "Yes, Mark. I'll marry you." The wedding was a small affair, just as we wanted. My parents, a few close friends, and of course, Alex, Mark's son. I could tell the kid wasn't thrilled about the situation, but he didn't kick up a fuss. Probably didn't want to upset his dad. Life with Mark was mostly smooth sailing, at least until the day he came to me with a request that threw me for a loop. "Hey, Laura, can we talk about something?" Mark asked one evening, looking a bit uneasy, which was unusual for him. "Sure, what's up?" I replied, setting down my book. His tone had already put me on alert. "It's about Alex," he began, pacing a little. "He's got this dream of starting a music band, and he's pretty serious about it." I nodded, encouraging him to continue. Music was a great outlet for teens, after all. "Well, he's short on cash for some equipment and stuff. I was wondering, could we help him out?" "He needs about $10,000, Mark finished, finally stopping to look at me. I almost choked on my tea. $10,000? That's a lot of money, Mark. I know, but it's for a good cause, right? It's his dream," Mark pressed, his eyes searching mine for some sign of agreement. I sighed, feeling a mix of emotions. On one hand, I wanted to support Mark and his son, but on the other, this was a huge amount of money. "Let me think about it, okay?" In the end, I agreed. Seeing Mark so hopeful and excited about helping his son was touching. But that was just the beginning. A few months later, Mark came to me again. This time, he seemed more anxious. "Laura, I hate to ask, but Alex needs more money for the band. Another $10,000, he said quickly, as if trying to get the words out before he could change his mind. I felt my frustration rise. "Again, Mark? We just gave him $10,000. Where is all that money going?" Mark's face fell, and he became defensive. "He's investing in his future, Laura. Don't you think it's worth it?" "I do, but it's a lot of money. We're not made of cash, you know," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm. The argument that followed was heated. Mark accused me of not caring about Alex's future, and I accused him of not being realistic. It ended with Mark storming out, leaving me alone and bewildered. He returned a few days later, apologetic but still insistent. "I'm sorry for blowing up, Laura. But it's important. To me, to Alex. Please." Torn between my love for Mark and my concerns about this seemingly bottomless pit of financial support for Alex's band, I agreed once more. But it didn't sit right with me. Then came the bombshell. Mark, looking more haggard and desperate than I'd ever seen him, asked for $30,000. "Mark, this is crazy. $30,000? What's going on? This isn't just about some band," I said, feeling my patience wearing thin. It's for a tour. They've got a real shot, Laura," he stammered, avoiding my gaze. "A tour? Mark, you can't expect me to believe this. We need to see some proof, something to show for all this money," I demanded, my voice rising. Mark exploded. "Why can't you just trust me, Laura? Why do you always have to make things so difficult?" The fight that ensued was ugly, full of accusations and hurtful words. Mark threatened divorce if I didn't agree to give Alex the money. I was stunned. This wasn't the man I married. I asked for time to think, but what I really needed was answers. This situation felt wrong on so many levels, and I was determined to get to the bottom of it. First stop on my detective trail was the internet. I figured if Alex's band was legit, they'd have some kind of online presence. So, I hunkered down with my laptop, typed in the band's name Mark mentioned, and hit search. The results were as barren as a desert, nothing, zip, zilch. Not a single trace of a band that was supposedly on the brink of their big break. Feeling a mix of frustration and vindication, I headed over to Alex's Instagram. If there were any clues to be found, it had to be there. I scrolled through his feed, which was like flipping through a catalog of luxury. Fancy dinners, designer gear, you name it. But among the high-life snapshots, not a single pic hinted at a music career. No instruments, no rehearsal spaces, nothing. Baffled, I decided it was time for some expert advice. I dialed up Danny, a buddy from college who's now deep into the music scene, always on the pulse of the latest bands and trends. "Hey Danny, it's me," I started, trying to sound casual. "Quick question for you, ever heard of a band called?" I gave him the name Mark had fed me. There was a moment of silence on the line, then Danny's confused voice came through. "Never heard of them. And trust me, if they were making any waves, I'd know. Why? They any good?" I let out a sigh, a mix of disappointment and relief. "Nah, just came across the name. Thought I'd check. Thanks, man." Danny's curiosity was piqued. "You sure? I can do a bit more digging if you want." "No, it's okay. Really. I appreciate it, though," I said, before quickly changing the subject. We chatted for a few more minutes about nothing in particular, before hanging up. There I was, back at square one, but now armed with a bucket load of doubts, and no one to share them with. I didn't breathe a word of this to Mark. How could I? I didn't know whether he was in on this scam or just another pawn in Alex's game. Nah, this needed more digging, and until I had something solid, my lips were sealed. The moment had come to face the music, or, more accurately, the lack thereof. I perched in front of my computer, the green light of the webcam flickering to life. My finger hovered over the Skype icon before pressing it with determination. This wasn't just a call, it was a confrontation. Alex answered, his face filling the screen. He looked relaxed, maybe too relaxed, like he was about to schmooze more money out of me. He didn't know the storm that was coming. "Hey, Laura. What's up?" he started, all smiles. "Cut the crap, Alex. We're not playing this game anymore. There's no band, is there? No music, no gigs, just you, living it up on my dime." I shot back, not giving him an inch. He tried to keep his smile, but I saw it falter. "What are you talking about?" "Of course, there's a..." "Save it. I've done my homework. Your Instagram's a nice little portfolio of lies." "Yeah, your band is as real as a $3 bill. I cut him off, my voice sharp as a knife. For a moment, Alex looked like he was searching for another lie, another angle. But then, his expression shifted, darkened. "You're gonna regret poking your nose into this, Laura. I've got friends, the kind that make problems go away." The thread hung in the air, a shadow passing over his face. My heart skipped, fear mingling with anger. But I wasn't about to back down. "Threats, Alex? Really? Here's something you should know, this call is being recorded. Every word. Think your friends can handle police heat?" Watching his bravado crumble was almost satisfying. His face went from confident to pale, his eyes wide. "No, no, no. You can't." I was just... "Please, Laura. I made it up, okay? There's no gang, no friends. It's just me." The tears started, his tough act melting away to reveal a scared kid in over his head. But I was past sympathy. "All this, for what, Alex? Why the lies? Why the money?" He was sobbing now, a mess of regret and fear. I just wanted to be someone, you know? Someone important. The money, the lifestyle. I thought it would make me happy." "And you lied to your father? That part of your happiness plan?" I pushed, needing him to understand the weight of his actions. He flinched, wiping his eyes. "It wasn't supposed to go this far. I found out about him and someone else. Photos. I thought I could use it to... I don't know, get more money, keep up the act. I felt cold, a chill that went bone deep. You have proof? Send it. Now. He didn't argue, quickly tapping away on his end. Moments later, my phone dinged with the incoming evidence. Photos of Mark in the arms of another woman, unmistakable in their betrayal. My heart broke, not just for the marriage I thought I had, but for the man I thought Mark was. Armed with the ugly truth and a heavy heart, I waited for Mark to come home. The air was thick with anticipation, almost suffocating. I rehearsed what I was going to say a million times over, but when I heard his key in the door, all my plans flew right out the window. He walked in, tired, the lines on his face more pronounced than ever. "Hey, Laura. We need to," he started, but I cut him off. "We need to talk. Now," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. Mark paused, looking at me, really looking, and he must have seen something in my eyes because he nodded, setting his bag down with a heaviness that matched my heart. "Okay, what's wrong?" I took a deep breath, the photos I'd received from Alex burning a hole in my pocket. "It's about Alex, and you." "I know everything, Mark." His face paled, the blood draining away as if I'd struck him. "What do you mean? Laura, Don't you dare lie to me, not now." "I've seen the photos, Mark. The ones Alex has been blackmailing you with. Of you and her." I spat out, the words tasting like bile. For a moment, he just stood there, a statue, then he slumped into a chair, his face in his hands. "Laura, I don't know what to say. I'm sorry, I never wanted you to find out this way." "Sorry? Is that supposed to make everything alright? You cheated on me, Mark. And then you let your son blackmail you into bleeding us dry." My voice was rising, a crescendo of betrayal and hurt. I know. It was a mistake, a terrible mistake. I was going to end it, I swear. And Alex, I didn't know how to handle it. I was scared of losing everything," he mumbled, his voice muffled by his hands. "Losing everything? You've already lost it, Mark. You lost me the moment you decided to step out on our marriage. And for what? A fling? To feel young again?" I was pacing now, the anger, the hurt, it was all bubbling up. I want a divorce. After the dust settled from our confrontation, the reality of my next steps began to sink in. Mark had retreated to a hotel, leaving me alone in the apartment we once shared, surrounded by memories that now felt like ghosts. I started packing, each item a reminder of the life I thought we were building together. It was surreal, sorting through our belongings, deciding what was mine and what we had shared. The packing didn't take as long as I thought. My life, it seemed, could be condensed into a few suitcases and boxes. A stark reminder of how quickly things can change, how swiftly the familiar can become past. Once everything was packed, I stood in the middle of the now bare living room, a pang of sadness hitting me. This was it. The end of a chapter. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the next step, and called a taxi. Arriving at the rented place felt like stepping into another world. It was smaller, less personal, but it was a clean slate, a place without the shadows of betrayal. After paying the taxi driver, I hauled my things up to the apartment, the physical exertion a welcome distraction from the turmoil inside. Once inside, surrounded by boxes and suitcases, I finally allowed myself a moment to breathe. The quiet of the apartment was a stark contrast to the storm of emotions I'd been living through. It was in this new silence that I realized the gravity of what had happened, of what I'd done. I'd left my husband, my home, and stepped into the unknown. Needing to hear a friendly voice, I picked up my phone and dialed Sarah, the friend whose birthday party had changed my life all those years ago. She answered on the second ring, her voice a balm to my frayed nerves. "Hey, it's me," I started, my voice steadier than I felt. "Hey, what's up? You sound off," she replied, her tone immediately shifting to concern. I took a deep breath, the words tumbling out. "I left Mark. I found out about everything. The affair, the lies, Alex's blackmail. I couldn't stay there, in that apartment, with all those memories. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. Oh my God, Laura, I'm so sorry. Are you okay? Where are you? I'm in a rented apartment. Just needed to get away, to start figuring things out on my own, I explained, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. Laura, I'm here for you, whatever you need. I can't believe he would do that to you, Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. Thanks, Sarah. It means a lot. I just need some time, to process all of this. Hanging up, I felt a small sense of comfort, a reminder that despite everything, I wasn't completely alone. The first few weeks after leaving Mark were a blur of emotions and paperwork. The divorce proceedings were underway, a seemingly endless stream of signatures and legalities that felt both freeing and suffocating. The end of my marriage had sent ripples through my life, changing not just my future but Mark's as well. He's been having a rough time. The story got out, about the affair and the blackmail. It's affected his job, his reputation. It was a sobering thought, one that made me realize the depth of the fallout from our shattered relationship. In the days that followed, I threw myself into work and started exploring new hobbies, anything to rebuild the pieces of myself that had been lost in the turmoil. Slowly, I began to find joy in the little things, a coffee at a new cafe, a book that made me think, a jog in the park that cleared my mind. One afternoon, I decided to visit an art class, something I'd always wanted to try but never had the courage to do. There, covered in paint and laughing at my own lack of skill, I felt a spark of something new. It wasn't just about moving on from Mark, it was about rediscovering who I was without him. Just when I thought I was finding my new normal, my phone rang with a number I hadn't expected to see again, Alex's. Hey. His voice came through, tentative, a stark contrast to the bravado and deceit that had marked our last exchanges. I hesitated, the old hurt flaring up for a moment, before I pushed it down. Alex. What's up? I just wanted to say I'm sorry, for everything. I messed up, big time. I realized I was chasing all the wrong things, for all the wrong reasons, he said, the words rushed, like he'd been rehearsing them. I listened, the silence on my end prompting him to continue. It's just, I never really got much attention from Dad, And money, we never had enough. I thought if I could just live that life, even for a little while, it'd make things better. But I was wrong, he admitted, his voice laced with something that sounded a lot like regret. Alex, I forgive you. But you need to understand, going down that path, using people, lying, it's only going to bring you more trouble, I said, my tone more gentle than I would have expected of myself. There was a pause, and then a quiet, I know. I'm going to change, I promise. No more lies, no more schemes. I'm done with that life. His words held a note of sincerity that I hadn't heard from him before. It was enough to make me believe that maybe, just maybe, he was ready to turn a new leaf. Good. Stick to that promise, Alex. It's never too late to start making the right choices, I encouraged, a part of me hoping he'd take my words to heart. We ended the call soon after, and I found myself staring at the phone long after the line had gone dead. Alex's apology and the promise of change were unexpected but welcome. It was a small step towards closing a painful chapter for both of us. In the days that followed, I threw myself even more into my work, my art, and my friendships. Each brushstroke on the canvas, each laugh shared with friends, felt like a declaration of my resilience, a testament to my ability to move forward. Back then, I was just a girl with a pair of scissors and a dream, working in a no-name salon on the edge of town. My life was as ordinary as they come, filled with small talk, hair dye, and the buzz of hair clippers. Then, he walked in, a regular Joe needing a trim, but that haircut was about to change everything. Hey, got time for a walk-in? He asked, poking his head around the door, casual, like he was just in the neighborhood. I glanced up, meeting his gaze for the first time. Sure thing, take a seat. I motioned to the empty barber chair. He sauntered over, all easy confidence, and plopped down. I'm Tom, he said, throwing me a grin that felt like it could melt the hardest of hearts. Lydia, I replied, trying to sound cool and professional as I draped the cape over him. So, what are we doing today? Just a trim, or are you looking to shake things up? Just a trim, he chuckled, his eyes meeting mine in the mirror. Don't think I'm ready to shake up anything just yet. As I started cutting, we fell into easy conversation. Turns out, we both had a thing for old rock bands and crappy horror movies. Who would have thought, right? He had this way of talking, like he genuinely cared about what I thought. It was refreshing, made me laugh more than I had in a long time. You know, you're the first hairdresser I've met who knows more about Zombie Island Massacre than I do, he joked, as I snipped away. I scoffed, playfully nudging his shoulder. Please, that movie's a classic. Besides, it's not often I get a client who appreciates fine cinema. He laughed, that sound filling the small space between us, and I couldn't help but join in. By the time I was done with his hair, it felt like we'd known each other for years instead of minutes. There, all set, I said, brushing off the last few hairs from his neck. What do you think? He studied his reflection, running a hand through his freshly cut hair, then flashed me another one of those killer smiles. Looks great, Lydia. You've got magic hands. I felt a blush creep up my neck. Thanks, Tom. That'll be $15. He handed over the money, his fingers brushing mine for a split second. How about I take you out for a drink to say thanks? There's this dive bar around the corner, nothing fancy, but it's got character. I hesitated, not because I didn't want to go, but because it felt like stepping into uncharted territory. I don't know. Come on, he coaxed, his eyes twinkling with a mix of challenge and something softer. When was the last time you did something spontaneous? That night at the bar, Tom and I talked about everything under the sun, from our dreams to our favorite pizza toppings. Our casual dates quickly turned into something more. Nights out at the dive bar became cozy evenings in, cooking dinner together or binging on those crappy horror movies we both loved. Our banter was easy, full of laughs and those tough, no bullshit conversations that only made us closer. Lydia, I think this is it for me, Tom declared one evening, his usual playful tone replaced by something deeper, more serious. His sincerity took my breath away. Tom, me too. I've never been this happy. Not long after, we decided to tie the knot. A couple of years down the line, our son, Alex, came into the world, making our small family feel complete. Watching Tom become a father was like falling in love with him all over again. Raising Alex was a wild ride, filled with laughter, late-night feeds, and learning on the fly. Tom and we were figuring it out as we went, leaning on each other through the sleepless nights and the baby milestones. Our little apartment was always a mess, toys everywhere, but it was our mess, our perfect little chaos. Lydia, have you seen my socks? Tom would holler from the bedroom over the sound of Alex's giggles as I chased him around the living room. In the drawer where they always are, I'd shout back, trying not to trip over the myriad of toys strewn across the floor. Life was good, simple but good. As Alex grew, so did our family dynamic. He was this bright, curious kid with a wild imagination and an even wilder energy level. Keeping up with him was a full-time job, but Tom and we tag-teamed it like pros. 30 years have passed at such a pleasantly insane pace. Then came the day Sarah walked into my salon. She was a breath of fresh air, with her easy smile and her way of making you feel like you'd been friends for years. As she sat in my chair, pouring her heart out about her recent breakup, I found myself genuinely caring about this girl, her story touching something in me. Men are trash, she huffed, a fire in her eyes as she recounted her tale of woe. I couldn't help but laugh, snipping away at her hair. Not all of them, surely. I got lucky with mine, but it took a few frogs to find my prince. She smiled at that, a real smile that reached her eyes. You give me hope, Lydia. It was during one of these sessions that Alex decided to drop by, something about needing to borrow money for God knows what. The moment he and Sarah met, it was like watching a live spark. They hit it off instantly, their chemistry undeniable. "Mom, Sarah's cool, where'd you find her?" Alex asked later, trying to sound nonchalant but failing miserably. "In my chair, where else?" I teased, knowing full well what was brewing between those two. Sure enough, they started dating, and it wasn't long before they were inseparable. Watching them together, it was like witnessing a whole new chapter beginning, not just for them, but for our family too. Their whirlwind romance led them down the aisle in no time, and Tom and I found ourselves welcoming Sarah into the family with open arms. "Dad, I'm gonna marry her," Alex announced one day, a serious look on his face. Tom clapped him on the back, a broad smile spreading across his face. "You've got my blessing, son. Just make sure you're ready for the wild ride that is marriage." And what a ride it was. Their wedding was a simple affair, much like ours had been, but it was perfect. There was laughter, dancing, and an overwhelming sense of joy that filled the air. "Welcome to the family, Sarah," I said, pulling her into a hug. "You're stuck with us now, for better or worse." She laughed, hugging me back. "Wouldn't have it any other way, Lydia." Our family gatherings became the highlight of our weeks, filled with good food, great company, and the inevitable stories of Alex trying to impress Sarah with his not-so-impressive cooking skills. "Mom, tell Sarah about the time I made that 3-course meal," Alex would say, puffing out his chest with pride. I'd exchange a knowing look with Sarah, then dive into the tale, embellishing here and there for comedic effect. Well, the fire department only had to come once, so I'd say it was a success. Everyone would burst into laughter, the sound and melody that filled our home with warmth and happiness. Life has a way of throwing curveballs, and ours came hurtling out of left field. Tom, my rock, the guy who'd been by my side through thick and thin, started acting off. It was little things at first, staying late at work, business trips that seemed to pop up out of nowhere. "Tom, you're working late again?" I'd ask, phone cradled between my ear and shoulder as I tried to juggle dinner prep. "Yeah, babe, big project. You know how it is." His voice came through, tired but edged with something I couldn't quite place. I did know, or at least I thought I did. But then the late nights started stacking up, becoming more the rule than the exception. And the gym? Tom hadn't stepped foot in one since I'd known him, and suddenly he's all about fitness, talking about getting in shape like it was his new religion. One evening, as he laced up his sneakers, I couldn't hold back my curiosity. "Since when do you care about hitting the gym?" He chuckled, a sound that used to warm me but now felt like it was skating over something colder. "What, can't a guy want to look good for his wife?" His words should have soothed me, but they didn't. There was a gap between us that words couldn't bridge anymore. Then there was Sarah, our son's wife, who'd been like a daughter to us. She was in on these family dinners, laughing and joking, yet I noticed she'd started spending more time on her phone, smiling at texts in a way that seemed off. "Who's keeping you smiling like that?" I asked her one afternoon as we cleared up after lunch. "Just a friend from work, you know how it is," she replied, her gaze darting away from mine a little too quickly. "Yeah, I know how it is," I echoed, a sinking feeling in my stomach. Things came to a head when a friend of mine, Jenna, pulled me aside one day. We were at the market, and out of nowhere, she said, "Lydia, I saw Tom at the hotel downtown, and he wasn't alone." My heart stopped. "What are you talking about, Jenna?" "Tom's been on a business trip." She hesitated, then pulled out her phone, showing me a video. There he was, my Tom, arm around a woman. That alone was a gut punch, but when the woman turned her face towards the camera, the ground slipped away beneath me. It was Sarah. I felt like I was choking, the air too thick to breathe. "This has to be a mistake," I whispered, more to myself than to Jenna. "I wouldn't tell you if I wasn't sure, Lydia," Jenna said, her voice full of sympathy I didn't want or need. I nodded, numb, asking her to send me the video before we parted ways. When I got home, Tom was his usual self, asking about my day with that same distracted air. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw a stranger where my husband used to be. Everything's fine, I lied smoothly, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Just the usual day. I needed time to think, to plan, to figure out what the hell I was going to do. Later, alone in our room, I watched the video again. And there it was, the truth I couldn't deny any longer. All of Tom's late nights, his newfound love for the gym, it all made a sickening kind of sense. I sat there, phone in hand, feeling a rage and sorrow I didn't know were possible. Tom, the man I'd spent my life with, and Sarah, who I'd welcomed into our family with open arms, had betrayed me in the most unimaginable way. The days following the revelation felt like walking through a thick fog, each step heavier than the last. But I knew I had to clear the air, for my sake and Alex's. The decision to confront Tom and Sarah together weighed on me like a ton of bricks. My hand shook as I dialed Alex's number, my heart pounding against my ribcage. "Hey, Mom, what's up?" Alex's voice, always so full of life, cut through the silence of the room. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "Alex, we need to talk. It's important. Can you come over?" There was a brief pause, concern creeping into his tone. "Sure, everything okay?" "We'll talk when you get here, honey," I said, trying to keep my voice even. The wait for Alex to arrive was excruciating. Tom was out, probably with her, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the damning video on my phone. When Alex finally walked through the door, his brows were furrowed in worry. "Mom? You're scaring me. What's going on?" he asked, closing the door behind him. I motioned for him to sit down, my hands trembling as I passed him my phone. "Watch this," I said, the words barely a whisper. Alex's confusion turned to shock, then horror as the video played out. He looked up at me, his eyes searching for an explanation, any explanation that could make this nightmare make sense. "Mom, please tell me this isn't real," he begged, the pain in his voice a mirror of my own. "It's real, Alex. I'm so sorry," I said, my voice breaking. We sat in silence, the weight of betrayal hanging heavy between us. After what felt like an eternity, Alex spoke up, his voice hardened with resolve. "We need to confront them. Together," he said, and I nodded. There was no other way forward. The dinner table was set, a macabre stage for the unraveling of our family. Tom and Sarah arrived together, oblivious to the storm they were about to walk into. Their laughter grated on my nerves, but I kept my composure. "Lydia, this looks wonderful," Sarah said, taking her seat with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I forced a smile in return, waiting for Alex to signal he was ready. He gave me a subtle nod, and I knew it was time. "Tom, Sarah, we have something to show you," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. I played the video, watching their faces closely. Tom's expression crumbled, guilt washing over him. Sarah, on the other hand, looked defiant, even as her facade began to crack. "This is nonsense. It's not what it looks like," Tom stammered, looking from me to Alex, desperate for any sign of belief. "What, are you going to deny it? Even now?" Alex's voice was cold, his anger palpable. Sarah finally spoke up, her voice laced with arrogance. "What? Afraid of a little competition?" The room went silent, the audacity of her words hanging in the air. Tom looked defeated, the reality of his actions finally dawning on him. "Competition? Is that what I am to you?" I asked, my heart breaking all over again. Alex stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I want you out of my house, now," he directed at Sarah, his voice leaving no room for argument. She scoffed, her delusion seemingly boundless. "We need housing. I'm entitled to half of this apartment and alimony." The room went silent for a moment, her words hanging in the air like a bad smell. Alex let out a harsh laugh, shaking his head. "The apartment's mine, bought before we were married. You've got no claim to it, and forget about alimony after what you did." The showdown with Sarah was brutal, but clear-cut. She stormed out, her threats echoing hollowly behind her. But then, Tom turned to me, his expression shifting from guilt to something harder, colder. "We need to talk about our property," he said, the words heavy between us. "It needs to be divided. Our home, our life together for 30 years, reduced to mere assets, to be split." The pain of his betrayal was one thing, but this cold demand was another knife twist. "So, this is it? After everything, all you care about is money?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice from breaking. "It's only fair. We built this together, so we split it," Tom replied, his voice void of the warmth I once knew. The divorce was nothing short of a soap opera, with more drama and screaming than I'd ever experienced in my life. Courtrooms aren't exactly the place for airing family secrets, but there we were, laying it all out for the judge to see. Tom had decided to throw in his lot with Sarah, his son's ex-wife, of all people. If you'd told me a couple of years ago that my life would turn into this mess, I'd have laughed in disbelief. After the judge banged that gavel for the last time, declaring us officially divorced, Sarah had the nerve to gloat. "Guess you're on your own now, huh? Kinda old to find someone decent," she sneered, thinking she'd struck a nerve. I just smiled at her, shaking my head. "Honey, if Tom's your idea of a decent man, I'm better off alone," I said, walking away with my dignity intact. Let her have Tom and all the headaches that came with him. I had bigger fish to fry. With my share of the property settlement, I bought a modest apartment in a quiet part of town. It was no palace, but it was mine, a fresh start. The rest of the money went into my dream, a beauty salon of my own. The day I opened the doors to the public, I felt a mix of nerves and pride. "This is it, Mom. You're gonna knock 'em dead," Alex said, hugging me tight before the first customers walked in. And he was right. Word of mouth spread, and before I knew it, Lydia's Oasis was the go-to spot in town. The online reviews raved about the place, and my heart swelled with pride every time I read a new one. Alex's life took a turn for the better, too. He met Emily, a woman as far from Sarah as the moon is from the sun. When they got married, it was a small affair, full of love and laughter, the complete opposite of his first wedding. And then came the twins, my beautiful grandbabies, filling my life with joy I didn't know was missing. "Babysitting duty, Mom. You up for it?" Alex would ask, dropping the twins off so he and Emily could have some much-needed couple time. "Bring it on. These munchkins are no match for Grandma," I'd reply, gearing up for a day filled with games, giggles, and the occasional diaper disaster. Sarah's words from the courthouse echoed in my mind, and I laughed. Old and alone? Far from it. I was surrounded by love, my business was thriving, and my heart was full. I didn't just survive, I flourished. And as for Tom and Sarah, well, let's just say I wished them all the happiness they deserved. That call, it hit me like a freight train out of nowhere. Tom, of all people, with his voice oozing confidence like he was entitled to something from me. "Lydia, you know, that salon of yours. I was thinking, given how well it's doing and all, it's only fair I get a piece of it. After all, wasn't it my money that got it started?" He had the audacity to claim. I felt my blood boil, but managed to keep my cool. "Oh, is that so?" I played along, curiosity getting the better of me. "Why don't we meet and chat about this, Tom? Say, next week?" The call with Alex that followed was a whirlwind of emotion. Can you believe this, Alex? After everything, he still thinks he can squeeze more out of me. Alex was furious on my behalf. "Mom, this is ridiculous. Let's dig up some dirt on him. A private investigator should do the trick." The week that followed was surreal. I was physically at the salon, but my mind was miles away, lost in thought and worry over what Tom was plotting. My staff and regulars could tell something was up. "You all right, Lydia? You seem distracted," they'd say. "Just an old ghost decided to pay a visit," I'd quip back, forcing a smile. But the anxiety gnawed at me, wondering what dirt the investigator would unearth. Finally, the report landed in my hands. The findings were a mix of the expected and the utterly shocking. Tom and Sarah's life wasn't the picture-perfect scene they had been painting. Oh, how the mighty had fallen. I couldn't help but laugh, a deep, guttural sound that surprised even me. With this in my arsenal, I was more than ready to face Tom. Walking into that bustling cafe, my stomach was in knots, but my determination was ironclad. Spotting Tom and his little family setup was like watching a bad soap opera live. He was there, grinning like a Cheshire cat, with Sarah, heavily pregnant, and this young dude introduced as her brother. Right off the bat, the scene was ripe with pretense. Tom wasted no time, launching into his spiel with gusto. "Lydia, so good of you to join us. Look, we're expanding the family," he said, gesturing towards Sarah's belly with a pride that seemed misplaced. "And we got to thinking, what's better for our future than having a stake in your salon? It's booming, and Sarah here, she's got the knack. She's dreaming of her own place." I couldn't help but laugh, not a polite chuckle, but a deep, from-the-gut laugh. "Tom, you're dreaming if you think you're entitled to any part of my salon. But, let's cut to the chase, shall we? You, my dear ex-husband, are not the father of Sarah's baby." The table went dead quiet, the air thick with tension. Tom's smile faltered, confusion etching his features. "Lydia, what the hell are you talking about?" I took my time, pulling out the photos, videos, and the clincher, the medical documents. "This young man," I said, pointing at the so-called brother, "is actually your wife's lover, not her brother. And Tom, about being a dad again, remember our little chickenpox saga? The doctor was quite clear about the aftermath, infertility." Watching the color drain from Tom's face was, I admit, a guilty pleasure. Sarah's smugness evaporated, replaced by panic, while her brother looked ready to sink through the floor. Tom leaped up, rage contorting his face, turning towards the young man with fire in his eyes. You're dead, mate." The cafe erupted into chaos, patrons scrambling to get a better view, phones out, recording every second. Sarah was shrieking, her brother trying to defend himself, and Tom looking like he wanted to tear the world apart. I stood, my voice cutting through the mayhem. "I've had enough of this circus. You three deserve each other." I didn't wait for a response, didn't look back to see the aftermath of the bomb I'd dropped. Walking out of that cafe, the air never tasted sweeter, the sun never shone brighter. After the cafe showdown, life seemed to pick up speed, barreling towards a future I was eager to meet head-on. One morning, as I unlocked the salon's door, I was greeted by the familiar faces of my staff, each one a key player in my journey to rebuilding my life. "Morning, boss lady. Ready to conquer the day?" Jenny, my top stylist, called out with a grin. I chuckled, flipping the sign to open. "With you lot by my side? Always." The day was a whirlwind of snips and styles, laughter, and gossip, the kind of day that reminded me why I'd fallen in love with this business in the first place. As we were closing up, Alex and Emily stopped by, the twins in tow, their faces smeared with what looked suspiciously like chocolate. "Grandma, look what we made at school today," one of the twins, Mia, exclaimed, holding up a drawing that was more abstract than anything. I crouched down to their level, pulling them into a hug. "This is going straight on the fridge, my little artists." Alex watched us, a soft smile on his face. "You're doing amazing, Mom. I'm proud of you." I stood up, ruffling the twins' hair. "We're doing amazing, Alex. This family, this life, it's more than I could have asked for." That night, as I sat on my balcony, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, I couldn't help but feel grateful. Grateful for the struggles that had shaped me, for the betrayal that had tested me, and for the love that had seen me through. Tom and Sarah were now just footnotes in my story, a story that was far from over. I had chapters yet to write, adventures yet to embark on, and love yet to give. The dawn of a new day had never felt so sweet, so full of promise. I'm Jess, a 26-year-old nurse who's seen enough to know life ain't always a smooth ride. The day that rock band rolled into town was a break from the usual chaos. Their music was my escape, something my soul craved more than my next breath. That night, I decided to let loose, heading to their concert alone, not knowing it'd change my life. The arena was packed, the air electric with anticipation. I wove through the crowd, finding a spot that felt like it was made just for me. That's when I bumped into him, literally. A tall guy with a mischievous smile, wearing a band tee that looked like it had seen better days. "Hey, watch it!" I snapped, more out of surprise than annoyance. "Sorry, didn't see you there," he replied, his grin widening. "You here alone?" "Yeah, and by the looks of it, so are you." I shot back, my defenses up. He laughed, a sound that seemed to cut through the pre-concert buzz. "Name's Tom. And yeah, I wouldn't miss this for the world. These guys are like the soundtrack to my life." "Jess," I said, offering a hand grudgingly. His grip was firm, reassuring somehow. "Same here. Grew up with their music." We chatted as if we'd known each other for years, not minutes. Tom had a way of making me laugh, really laugh, something I hadn't done in a while. When the concert started, we were lost in the music, together yet alone in our little bubble. After the encore, neither of us wanted the night to end. "Know a decent cafe around here?" Tom asked, his eyes searching mine. "Might do. Follow me," I said, leading the way. The cafe was quiet, a stark contrast to the concert's frenzy. We found a secluded corner, our conversation flowing as easily as the coffee. "So, nurse, huh? Bet you've got stories," Tom said, his voice a mix of curiosity and respect. "More than I can count. And what about you? What's your deal?" I asked, leaning in. "I work in IT. Not as exciting as saving lives, but it pays the bills." He shrugged, a hint of humility in his eyes. We talked about everything and nothing, from our craziest dreams to our mundane daily gripes. It felt natural, easy. Before we knew it, hours had passed. "Should probably get going," Tom said reluctantly. "But I don't want this to be the last time we talk." "Me neither," I admitted, feeling a connection I couldn't quite explain. We exchanged phones, typing in our numbers with the promise of a call. As we said goodbye, I felt something shift inside me. Maybe it was the music, the night, or just Tom himself, but I walked away feeling lighter, my heart pounding in my chest. After a few months of dating Tom, the day came to meet his family, or more accurately, his mom. He'd been upfront about living with her, saying she was all he had in terms of family. I respected that. My own family was just my grandma, after all. Tom's place was modest, a cozy little house with a garden that looked like it needed a bit of love. "Mom's inside," he said, a hint of nervousness in his voice as we approached the door. It struck me then how important this was to him, and suddenly, I was the one feeling jittery. The door swung open to reveal a woman in her late 50s, her hair a tangle of curls, eyes sharp as they landed on me. "So, you're Jess," she said, her voice carrying a note that I couldn't quite place. Was it curiosity? Suspicion? "Nice to meet you, Mrs. Johnson," I offered, extending a hand that she took after a brief hesitation. "Call me Linda," she said, leading us into the living room. The place was neat, filled with photos of Tom at various ages. It was clear he was the center of her world. We sat, and Linda wasted no time diving in. "Tom tells me you're a nurse. That's a hard job. You plan on doing that long?" I nodded, sensing where this was heading. "I love my job, but I'm also planning to study further, maybe become a doctor someday." Linda's eyes narrowed a bit. "A doctor, huh? That's a lot of school. Expensive, too." Tom jumped in, trying to smooth the waters. "Mom, Jess is really passionate about her work. It's one of the things I admire about her." Linda turned her gaze to Tom, and then back to me, her expression softening slightly. "Tommy here has always been my rock. After his dad left, it was just the two of us. I've given everything to him, you know." I caught Tom's eye, a silent communication passing between us. I knew this was hard for him, torn between the two most important women in his life. Linda continued. I rely on Tom for a lot. He's been so good to me, giving me half his salary every month. It's only fair, after all I've sacrificed. The air in the room felt heavier, the tension palpable. I didn't know what to say. It was clear Linda expected this arrangement to continue, even with me in the picture. And what about your family, Jess? Linda's question snapped me back to the moment. I was raised by my grandmother, I said, my voice steady. My parents died when I was young. Grandma's all I have. Linda nodded, a strange satisfaction in her eyes. Well, if you and Tom are serious, I'd expect you to contribute as well. $800 a month should cover it. I choked on the tea I'd been sipping. $800? Tom's hand found mine under the table, squeezing it gently. We'll work something out, Mom. Jess and I are a team now. When Tom and I decided to tie the knot, we knew it wouldn't be a lavish affair, but nothing prepared me for the battle over our wedding plans. Linda had her own ideas about saving money, which basically meant cutting down our guest list to a handful and scrapping any unnecessary celebrations. I wanted simple, sure, but I also wanted some joy, some celebration of us. One evening, as we sat down with Linda to discuss the wedding plans, the tension was thicker than the coffee Tom had brewed. So, I was thinking, Linda began, in that way that told you she wasn't just thinking, she was deciding. Why waste money on a big venue when we have a perfectly good backyard? Tom squeezed my hand under the table, a silent plea for patience. Mom, Jess, and I were hoping for a bit more, celebration. Not just a backyard thing. Linda's eyes narrowed, her lips pursing in that familiar line of disapproval. And who's going to pay for this celebration? You too? With what money? I took a deep breath, readying myself. We've been saving, Linda. And it's not like we want something extravagant. Just something a bit more special than the backyard. Linda scoffed. Special? You think spending money you don't have on one day is special? You know what's special? Security. Not starting your married life in debt. I could feel my patience wearing thin, but I held my ground. We understand the value of money, Linda. We're not talking about going into debt. Just a modest celebration at a small venue. We've done the math. Despite Linda's protests, we managed to reach a compromise of sorts, a small venue, close family and friends, and a strict budget. Linda insisted on overseeing the catering, claiming she could cut costs, which meant we ended up with a buffet that was more potluck than professional. On the day of our wedding, the venue looked, well, modest. My grandma, the one person from my family there, whispered to me as I readied myself, "This Linda, she's a piece of work, isn't she? Just remember, dear, you're marrying Tom, not his mother." The ceremony was short and sweet. Tom looked handsome, and when I walked down the aisle towards him, the look in his eyes told me we'd made the right choice. It was our moment, and even Linda couldn't tarnish that. At the reception, as guests mingled and the homemade buffet was served, Linda took it upon herself to remind everyone how much money we'd saved. "Just think what they can now put towards their future," she announced to a group of our friends, who nodded politely, their expressions a mix of amusement and sympathy. Tom's best man, Mike, a childhood friend who knew the family dynamics all too well, leaned over to us with a grin. "Hey, at least she didn't charge entry, right?" I laughed, the tension of the past weeks melting away in the warmth of the moment. Tom wrapped an arm around my waist, pulling me close. "We did it, Jess. Despite everything, we did it." "Yeah," I agreed, leaning my head against his shoulder. "And now, we start our lives together, just us." "And Linda," Tom added with a wry smile, earning him a playful jab in the ribs from me. Settling into married life with Tom was like navigating a boat on choppy waters. Our tiny rented apartment became our haven, a place where we planned to build our future together. But the shadow of financial strain loomed large over us, darkening even our brightest moments. One chilly evening, as we sat huddled over our budget spreadsheet, the reality of our situation hit me hard. "Look at this, Tom," I said, pointing at the screen. After rent, bills, and your mom's $800, there's barely anything left for us. Tom rubbed his eyes, weary from the long day. I know, Jess. But what can we do? Mom depends on that money. I sighed, frustration bubbling inside me. But does she really need that much? We're barely scraping by as it is. And we've been putting off so many things, like fixing the car, and even thinking about a down payment for a house. Tom's expression hardened, a defensive edge creeping into his voice. Jess, we've been over this. My mom raised me by herself. It's my duty to take care of her now. The argument ended with us in a tense silence, each stewing in our own stubbornness. But it didn't end there. Linda, ever the persistent one, took to calling me regularly, each conversation a thinly veiled reminder not to forget the $800 monthly tribute to her bank account. And when calls didn't cut it, she'd appear at our doorstep, lamenting her hard life and hinting heavily that a little more financial support wouldn't go amiss. I did my best to ignore the hints, to smile and nod and change the subject. But it grated on me, the constant pressure, the relentless reminders of a debt Tom felt we owed. Finally, one evening, after another of Linda's visits, I couldn't hold it in any longer. Tom, we need to talk about your mom, I started, the day's frustrations bubbling to the surface. I'm tired, Tom. Tired of the hints, the constant pressure for more money. We're saving for a down payment, for our future. Can't she see that? Tom's face went from puzzled to dark in seconds. My mom is always right, Jess, he said, his voice icy. You have no right to talk about her like that. She sacrificed everything for me. His words hit like a slap. So what, our plans, our future, doesn't count for anything? I shot back, anger rising. That was it. Tom shut down, walls up, and suddenly we were two strangers living in the same space. He wouldn't talk to me, not really. Our conversations dwindled to nothing, replaced by messages left on stickers on the fridge. Need milk. Working late. The bare minimum of communication. One rare evening, when the silence felt a bit less oppressive, I decided to broach the subject, the words tumbling out of me before I could think better of it. Tom, do you ever think about, us having kids? Tom, who'd been half focused on some bills, looked up, his expression unreadable. Kids? Jess, you know how Mom feels about that. She's already stretched thin with just us helping out. Yeah, but it's not about her, is it? It's about us, what we want, I said, a hint of desperation creeping into my voice. Tom sighed, setting the bills aside. I know, but think about it. The money, the time. How are we supposed to manage all that? Plus, Mom, she's outright against it. Says it's too much expense, too much hassle. I felt a flash of anger, frustration. So, what? Her word is law now? What about what we want, Tom? What about our life together? The room went quiet again, the air thick with words we couldn't seem to say. Tom finally broke the silence. I just don't think now's the right time, Jess. Maybe later, when things are better. The next day, Linda's unannounced visit threw gasoline on the already smoldering embers. I heard you two talking about kids, she started, her tone accusatory as if the mere thought was an affront to her. Yeah, so? I said, my patience worn thin. Linda's eyes narrowed. So, you think you can just bring kids into this mess? You can barely take care of yourselves. Where do you think the money for that will come from? Out of what you should be giving me. Her words stung, not because they were true, but because of the blatant disregard for our autonomy, our desires as a couple. It's our life, Linda. Our decision. I shot back, my voice firm. Your decision? No, my son's decision. And he knows better than to make a foolish mistake like that, Linda countered, her voice rising. The argument spiraled from there, voices raising, words that couldn't be taken back flying between us. It ended with me saying something I'd never thought I'd have to. Maybe we shouldn't see each other for a while. This is too much." Linda left in a huff, and Tom, when he found out, sided with her. Our home felt more like a battleground, each of us entrenched in our positions, the idea of starting a family now a no man's land between us. It started with a phone notification that blinked innocently enough, but held a punch that knocked the wind out of me. Tom had transferred $1,000 to his mom this month, not the usual $800. My mind raced, confusion and anger swirling together. When I confronted him, his response was as cold as the look in his eyes. "It's my decision, Jess. It's for my mom," he said, his voice flat, leaving no room for discussion. "But we agreed on a budget, Tom. We have our own needs, our own plans. How could you just change that without even talking to me?" I shot back, my voice rising with every word. Tom shrugged, a dismissive gesture that stung more than I expected. "Things change. I don't have to consult you on everything." That was the moment I felt it, the crack in what I thought was solid, the betrayal of our partnership. But the worst was yet to come. Days later, a friend from work, Carrie, called me, her voice hesitant. "Jess, I hate to be the one to tell you this, but I think you should know." She trailed off, the pause heavy with dread. "What is it, Carrie?" I urged, a sinking feeling in my stomach. "I saw Tom's profile on a dating site. He even messaged me, not realizing who I was at first." "I'm so sorry," she finished, her voice a mix of sympathy and discomfort. My world stopped. The air left my lungs in a rush, and I felt dizzy. "Are you sure?" I managed to whisper, clinging to a thread of hope that it was all a mistake. "Yes, I'm sure. I can send you the screenshots if you want," Carrie offered, and true to her word, she did. The evidence was undeniable. There was Tom's picture, his profile, and the messages he'd sent, flirting, suggesting they meet up. The betrayal cut deep, a wound I wasn't sure could ever heal. When Tom came home that night, I was waiting, the screenshots glowing accusingly on my tablet. His reaction was one of shock, then anger, not at being caught but at being confronted. "What, you're spying on me now? Invading my privacy?" he exploded, the audacity of his anger almost laughable. "Spare me, Tom. How long? How long have you been doing this?" I demanded, my voice shaking with emotion. Tom's anger fizzled out, replaced by a resignation that was somehow worse. "I don't know, Jess. A while, I guess. I needed something else. Something more. More than me. More than us," I said, the reality settling in like a stone in my stomach. "Yeah, I guess so," he admitted, and with those words, the last of my hope evaporated. "I want a divorce," I said, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. Tom looked at me then, really looked at me, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of the man I married. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by a cold indifference. "Fine," he said simply. "If that's what you want." The divorce proceedings were quick, devoid of the messy entanglements that come with shared assets or children. I moved back to my grandmother's house, the only place that still felt like home, carrying with me the pain of betrayal, but also a sense of relief. 3 months post-divorce, and life had started to settle into a new kind of normal, or as normal as it could get without Tom and his mom, Linda, in the picture. That is until my world got rocked again, but this time by loss. My grandmother passed away, leaving behind a void no one could fill. Along with the heartache came a surprise. She left me her house and a hefty sum of $800,000. Just when I thought things couldn't get any more surreal, Linda showed up at my doorstep, bursting with a kind of frantic excitement that felt out of place given the recent funeral. "Jess, darling. I heard about your inheritance. What a blessing." Linda gushed, not wasting a second on pleasantries. I stared at her, incredulous. "Linda, what are you doing here?" She brushed past me into the house, as if we were still family. "Now that you've come into this money, you can surely afford to help me out a bit more. Not just the usual $1,000, but maybe double that? And, oh, a small gift wouldn't hurt. Something nice, expensive." Her words were like a slap in the face, each one more absurd than the last. But it was her next statement that really threw me. "And since you're so well off now, I suppose it's okay for you to have a baby with Tom. I mean, with this kind of money, why not?" I couldn't help it, laughter bubbled up from within me, loud and uncontrollable. Linda looked at me as if I'd lost my mind. "Linda, you do know Tom and I are divorced, right? 3 months ago. Your son and I are done. Over." The look on her face was priceless, a mix of shock, disbelief, and something that looked suspiciously like panic. "Divorced? But Tom never said." Why would he hide that? Maybe because he didn't want to crawl back to Mommy's house? Or maybe he thought you'd cut him off financially? I shrugged, the absurdity of the situation not lost on me. Linda fumbled for her phone, dialing Tom in a frenzy. The conversation was short and heated, her voice rising with every word until she finally hung up, her face pale. He said it's true. Said he didn't tell me because he wanted to maintain independence. Independence. Now he tells me this, when we could have been rich. "Linda, it's time for you to go," I said, my patience wearing thin. She stood, defeated, but then, with a last-ditch effort, she turned to me. "Jess, can't you reconsider? For the sake of the family? Tom made a mistake, but surely..." I cut her off with another round of laughter. "Linda, there is no family, not between me and Tom. And after everything, you really think I'd go back to him? Please, leave." One morning, as I sat in the kitchen with a cup of coffee, the sun casting gentle patterns on the table, there was a knock at the door. Hesitant, I approached, half expecting Linda or, worse, Tom, to be on the other side. Instead, I found an old friend from nursing school, Maya, her face bright with a smile that was both comforting and contagious. "I heard about your grandma, Jess. I'm so sorry. And then I heard about, well, everything else," Maya said, stepping inside as I waved her in. We sat down, and over coffee, we caught up on life, on the turns mine had taken, and on her adventures since we last spoke. It was Maya who, after hearing my story, looked me dead in the eye and said, "Jess, it's time. Time to move on, for real. You've got this chance, this freedom. What's stopping you from taking the leap?" Her words struck a chord. "I've been thinking," I started, my mind racing with possibilities. "Maybe it's time to go back to school, like I always wanted. Get that degree, move into a field I'm passionate about." "Yes." Maya clapped her hands, her excitement palpable. "That's the spirit. Look, life's thrown you some curveballs, but you're still standing. And now you've got this incredible opportunity to do something just for you." The conversation with Maya lit a fire under me. It was the push I needed to finally make a decision, to move forward with purpose. I started researching programs that night, my heart set on advancing my career in a way I'd only ever dreamed of. But life has a funny way of testing you. Just as I was settling into this new chapter, Tom appeared on my doorstep one evening, looking every bit the man I once thought I knew. "Jess, can we talk?" he asked, a nervous edge to his voice I wasn't used to. I hesitated, a part of me curious, another part wary. "All right, Tom. Talk." He shuffled uncomfortably, looking around as if searching for the right words in the air around him. I heard about your inheritance. And about what you're doing with it. Going back to school, that's great, Jess." I raised an eyebrow, crossing my arms. "Thanks, Tom. Was there something else?" He sighed, a deep, weary sound. "I guess I just wanted to see if there was a chance for us. I've been doing some thinking and..." "No, Tom," I cut him off, my voice firm but not unkind. "There's no chance for us. Not anymore. I've moved on, really moved on. And you should too." As he turned to leave, I felt a weight lift, a final closure on a chapter that had dragged on too long. In the days that followed, I found myself more focused, more determined. I was building a life on my own terms, free from the expectations and disappointments of the past. My studies gave me a sense of direction, and my grandmother's inheritance allowed me the freedom to pursue my dreams without restraint. I'm not one for fairy tales or serendipity. My life's pretty much been about balance sheets, tax codes, and making sure numbers line up just right. Name's Emma, by the way. I've been an accountant for the better part of my adult life, recently turned auditor after a brutal few years hitting the books. That's the thing about me, when I set my sights on something, I get it done. No fluff, no fuss. This story kicks off on an unremarkable Tuesday. I was out hunting for a calculator, not just any calculator, mind you, but one of those fancy ones that can practically do your taxes for you. I found myself at this electronics sale downtown, thinking I'd swoop in and out. That's when the universe decided to throw me a curveball in the form of Alex. Alex was also in the market for a calculator, which I found out when we both reached for the last high-end model on the shelf. Our hands brushed, and I looked up into the most annoyingly charming face I'd ever seen. He had this cheeky grin like he'd won some sort of prize. "Looks like we've got ourselves a standoff," he said, his voice smooth but edged with amusement. I raised an eyebrow, not in the mood for games. I saw it first. I shot back, trying not to show any interest in the banter. But deep down, I was mildly entertained. "Oh, come on. Let's not start World War III over a calculator. How about we grab a coffee and talk it over?" he suggested, that grin still plastered on his face. The cafe was a little joint a few blocks away, quiet enough for us to chat. Turns out, Alex wasn't just some guy with a weird thing for calculators. He worked as a production director at his family's company, something to do with manufacturing that was miles away from my world of numbers. "So, you're like, what, a big shot at your company?" I asked, sipping my coffee, trying not to sound too impressed. He laughed, shaking his head. "Hardly. I just try to keep things running smoothly. It's my dad's business, really. I'm just the guy making sure we don't screw it up." The conversation flowed easier than I expected. Alex had a way of making you feel like you were the only two people in the room. He was curious about my work as an accountant, which no one outside of my profession had ever been before. "So you catch people trying to sneak a fast one with their finances?" he asked, intrigued. "Something like that. I make sure everything adds up. And when it doesn't, that's when I really get to work," I explained, warming up to the subject. "It's like being a detective, but for numbers." "Sounds intense. I can barely balance my checkbook without breaking a sweat," he admitted with a chuckle. We talked about everything and nothing, from our worst coffee experiences to the state of the economy. Before we knew it, hours had passed. Alex was easy to talk to, and for the first time in a long while, I felt genuinely relaxed. As the cafe started to hint at closing time, Alex finally broached the subject of the calculator again. "So, about our little standoff earlier," he began, trailing off with a smirk. I laughed, realizing I'd almost forgotten about it. "Keep it. I've got a spare at home anyway," I conceded, feeling unexpectedly generous. "Only if you let me take you out for dinner. Consider it a thank you for the calculator, and for the company today," he countered, his tone hopeful. I hesitated, not used to making spur-of-the-moment decisions like this. But something about Alex made me want to throw caution to the wind, just this once. "Deal. But if you're late, I'm taking the calculator back," I joked, fully aware I was stepping into uncharted territory. Life after meeting Alex took a turn for the unexpected. Our coffee dates turned into dinner dates, and before I knew it, I was deeply entangled in a world far removed from my spreadsheets and financial reports. It wasn't just about numbers anymore, it was about us, building something together. One evening, Alex and I were lounging on my couch, a mess of Chinese takeout containers between us. We'd been seeing each other for a solid few months by then, and everything felt right. Comfortable, even. "So, Emma," Alex began, his tone a bit more serious than the casual banter we'd been sharing. "I've been thinking." I eyed him suspiciously, a half-eaten spring roll, paused mid-air. Thinking can be dangerous. What's up? He chuckled, reaching for my hand. Dangerous, huh? Well, I was thinking about us. About how good this feels. I don't want to scare you off, but I really see this going somewhere. I set the spring roll down, my appetite suddenly replaced by a swarm of butterflies in my stomach. I feel the same, Alex. It's been easy. You know, in a good way. Exactly. He was animated now, his eyes lighting up. So, I was wondering, what do you think about us moving in together? The question caught me off guard. Moving in together was a big step, a leap into a future I hadn't allowed myself to fully imagine yet. But looking into Alex's hopeful eyes, I couldn't find a single reason to say no. I think I'd like that, I replied, my voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside me. Alex's grin could have lit up the room. Yeah? Yeah, I confirmed, my own smile mirroring his. Meeting Alex's family was the next natural step. His father, a self-made man with a firm handshake and a gaze that could either warm you up or freeze you out, welcomed me with surprising warmth. Emma, Alex hasn't stopped talking about you. Glad to finally meet the woman who's stolen his heart. His words were straightforward, no fluff, kinda like me. But it was Sarah, Alex's sister, who was a tougher nut to crack. As head of the purchasing department in their company, she eyed me like I was a column of numbers that didn't add up. So, an auditor, huh? Bet you're good at spotting any funny business. Her tone was loaded, like she was testing me. I do my best, I replied, keeping it cool, but friendly. I wasn't there to audit them, after all, just trying to make nice with the family. The wedding was nothing extravagant, just close friends and family. Alex and I weren't about the flash, we preferred something that felt more us. It was perfect, a testament to what we had together, solid and real without the need for show. 6 months into our marriage, I found out I was pregnant. Telling Alex was a moment I'll never forget. His face lit up like a kid on Christmas morning, and he scooped me up in his arms, spinning me around. We're going to be parents, Em. Can you believe it? We were over the moon, but sharing it with his family? We decided to break the news over dinner at his dad's place, the same house where I first met the old man and Sarah, who always looked at me like I was a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. The table was set like we were royalty, and his dad, Mr. Thompson, was in high spirits, probably because he thought this was just another casual family dinner. Little did he know. So, Emma, Alex tells me you're settling in just fine at the new place. That true? Mr. Thompson asked, passing me the potatoes. Yeah, it's been great. Feels like home already, I replied, trying to sound as relaxed as possible, despite the butterflies doing somersaults in my stomach. Sarah was poking at her food, silent up until now. Must be nice, playing house. Hope you're not distracting my brother too much from work, she said, her tone sharp like she was aiming darts my way. Alex jumped in before I could reply. Sarah, cut it out. Emma's been nothing but supportive. Plus, we've got some good news to share. He looked at me, nodding for me to go ahead. I took a deep breath. Well, the thing is, we're expecting a baby. You could have heard a pin drop. Mr. Thompson's fork paused midair, and even Sarah stopped her dart-throwing act to stare. A baby? Mr. Thompson finally broke the silence, his voice a mix of surprise and something else I couldn't quite place. Well, I'll be. Congratulations. This is wonderful news. He got up to hug us both, a wide grin spreading across his face. Sarah's reaction was cooler, forced even. Yeah, congrats. A baby, huh? That's big news. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes, and I could tell this wasn't what she expected to hear. Mr. Thompson, oblivious to the tension, was already making grand plans. We'll need to celebrate properly. And think about the future too. A grandchild. This calls for a toast. He was already fetching his best bottle, the mood significantly lifted. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of congratulations and plans for the future. Mr. Thompson was already joking about how the baby would take over the company one day, a comment that made Sarah's smile falter even more. Planning the baby shower wasn't even on my radar until Sarah brought it up out of the blue. We were at a family dinner, one of those where Mr. Thompson tries to make sure we all still liked each other. Sarah had been quieter than usual, which, if you knew Sarah, meant she was plotting something. Out of nowhere, she's like, "So, Emma, when's the baby shower? We should throw you one." Alex choked on his drink, and I swear, even Mr. Thompson looked like he'd seen a ghost for a second. Me? I was caught off guard. Hadn't really thought about it, I admitted, shooting a puzzled look at Alex, who shrugged. "Well, it's settled then. I'll organize it. It'll be at our place," Sarah announced, as if her deciding made it official. Alex tried to protest. "Sarah, you don't have to." But she cut him off. "Nonsense. It's what families do. Right, Dad?" Mr. Thompson, bless him, just nodded, probably too surprised or scared to disagree. So, it was settled. Sarah was throwing the baby shower, and I had this nagging feeling in my gut that her sudden generosity wasn't without strings. The day of the baby shower arrived, and honestly, it was more than I expected. The decorations were tasteful, the food was great, and Sarah played the part of the gracious hostess a little too well. Relatives I hadn't met yet were cooing over baby clothes and sharing unsolicited advice. It was all going surprisingly smooth, which should have been my first clue that something was up. Towards the end, just as people were starting to leave, Sarah made a show of clinking her glass to get everyone's attention. "Before we all go, I just want to say something," she started, her voice dripping with a sweetness that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Recently, we've had some things go missing in the house. Just small stuff, but still. I hate to ask, but could everyone just check their belongings? Just to be sure." The room went quiet. It was like one of those moments in a movie where you know something bad's about to happen. People started awkwardly rummaging through their bags and pockets, and I felt this sinking feeling in my stomach. "And Emma," Sarah turned to me, a smile plastered on her face, "I couldn't help but notice you putting something in your purse earlier. Mind showing us what it was?" My heart was racing. "Sure, Sarah. I've got nothing to hide," I said, my voice steady despite the panic setting in. I opened my purse and turned it upside down, letting its contents spill out on the table. Among the usual mess, a pair of diamond earrings clattered onto the surface. I froze. Those weren't mine. Sarah's smile widened. "Looks like we found our thief. We need to call the police." The room erupted into whispers, and I could feel every eye on me. I was mortified. "Those aren't mine. I swear," I managed to say, but my voice was barely above a whisper. Alex was by my side in an instant. "Enough, Sarah. We'll handle this ourselves," he said, his voice cold. The party broke up quickly after that. Accusations and confused goodbyes filled the air as people left. I was in a daze, the evening a blur of embarrassment and confusion. Once everyone was gone, I confronted Sarah. "Why would you do that? You know those aren't mine." Her response was a shrug. "Prove it." The ride home from the baby shower was like sitting on a ticking bomb. Alex was tight-lipped, hands clenched around the steering wheel, while I stared out the window, my mind racing. The silence between us was suffocating, but I was scared to break it, scared of what might come out. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "Alex, you believe me, right? Those earrings. I've never seen them before tonight." He glanced at me, his jaw working like he was chewing on the words, before spitting them out. "Of course, I believe you. It's just. Sarah wouldn't do something like this without a reason. It doesn't make sense." The next morning was awkward. Alex was trying, I could tell. He made breakfast, something he never did, and kept shooting me these little looks like he was checking if I was still there with him. I talked to my dad. "He wants us to come over, talk about what happened," Alex said, breaking the silence over eggs and toast. I put my fork down, appetite gone. "And what? Defend myself? Prove I'm not a thief?" It's not like that, Em. He's just concerned. We all are. Alex tried to explain, but his words felt like band-aids on a bullet wound. At Mr. Thompson's house, the air was charged. Sarah wasn't there, probably for the best, because I wasn't sure I could handle seeing her without lunging across the room. Mr. Thompson looked like he was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders, a look I hadn't seen before. Emma, Alex tells me there's been a misunderstanding. He started, his voice heavy. A misunderstanding? I repeated, incredulous. Your daughter accused me of stealing, in front of everyone. How is that a misunderstanding? Mr. Thompson sighed, a deep, weary sound. Sarah has her reasons for doing things. Sometimes, they're not clear to the rest of us. So, her reasons justify publicly humiliating me? I couldn't keep the bitterness out of my voice. It's not like that. We just need to get to the bottom of this, Alex interjected, but I was beyond listening. The days following the disaster of a baby shower were tense. Alex and I were tiptoeing around each other, and around the issue with Sarah, like it was a sleeping dragon. Neither of us wanted to poke it, but we both knew it was there, breathing fire on everything. It was late one evening, the kind where the silence feels too loud, that Alex finally broke. He came into the living room where I was pretending to read a book, my mind miles away. That's when the unexpected happened. Alex's phone rang, and the look on his face when he saw the caller ID was enough to freeze my blood. It was his dad. Hey, Dad. What? Now? Alex's voice was tense, his brows furrowed. After a moment, he nodded, though I knew his dad couldn't see. Okay, we'll be there. He hung up, looking at me with eyes that suddenly seemed older. That was my dad. He wants us to come over. Says it's urgent, about the company. The ride over was quiet, the kind of quiet that screams. When we got there, Mr. Thompson was waiting, looking like he'd aged 10 years in the last week. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. Thank you for coming. We have a situation, he began, voice grave. What kind of situation? Alex asked, straight to the point. It's the company. We're in trouble. Financial trouble, Mr. Thompson admitted, his usual strength wavering. My heart sank. What happened? I couldn't help but ask, the auditor in me needing to know. Mr. Thompson sighed, a long, tired sound. It's a lot of things. Bad deals, lost contracts. But there's more. I found discrepancies in the accounts. A lot of money's gone missing. Alex looked like he'd been punched. How? How did this happen? That's the thing. It seems like it was on purpose. Someone's been sabotaging the company from the inside. I felt cold, a dread settling in. Do you know who? The question hung in the air, heavy. Mr. Thompson met my eyes, then Alex's. I have my suspicions. It's why I needed to talk to you both. It's Sarah. The name dropped like a stone, sinking everything with it. Alex went pale. Sarah? But why? How can you be sure? I'm not completely. That's why I need your help, Emma. You're an auditor. You see things others don't. I need you to look into the company's accounts, discreetly. It was a lot to process. My mind was racing, thoughts tumbling over each other. I'll do it. I'll help you get to the bottom of this. The first step was getting access to all the financial documents, which Mr. Thompson provided without hesitation. Everything's in the company's server. I've given you full access, he had said, looking older and more tired than I remembered. Find whatever you can, Emma. We're counting on you. Armed with my laptop and a pot of coffee that seemed to perpetually refill itself, I set up shop in our home office. Alex, bless him, tried to help where he could, but numbers were never his strong suit. I feel like I'm looking at hieroglyphics, he admitted one evening, squinting at the screen over my shoulder. It's not so different, actually. Each number tells a story, I said, half joking. You just need to know the language. The deeper I dug, the uglier the picture became. There were transactions that made no sense, contracts signed with companies that seemed to exist only on paper, and payments for goods that were either never delivered or grossly overpriced. "Look at this," I pointed out to Alex, showing him an invoice for materials that was 3 times the market rate. "This is textbook kickback territory." He looked at the figures, his brow furrowing. "But why? Why would Sarah do this? It doesn't make any sense." Anger and frustration were simmering beneath the surface of his voice. I knew he was struggling to reconcile the sister he thought he knew with the evidence we were uncovering. One evening, after a particularly long session of cross-referencing invoices with delivery notes, Alex let out a deep sigh. "We're going to have to confront her, aren't we?" I closed my laptop, the weight of his words settling between us. "Yeah, but not yet. We need irrefutable proof first. We can't accuse her based on suspicion alone." It was late one night when I finally closed my laptop, the last piece of the puzzle slotting into place. We had it. Proof that Sarah had been embezzling from the company, signing off on deals that benefited her personally at the expense of the company's health. We were gathered in the boardroom, a room that had seen better days, with the weight of the company's future hanging in the balance. The air was thick, charged with anticipation and dread as Mr. Thompson, Alex, Sarah, and I, along with the rest of the board, sat around that imposing oak table. "As you're all aware, we've been facing significant financial discrepancies within the company," I started, my voice steady despite the fluttering in my stomach. "My investigation has uncovered the source of these issues." All eyes were on me, including Sarah's, which flickered with something I couldn't quite place. Fear, maybe, or defiance. "I found that contracts for equipment and materials have been signed with companies that exist only on paper. These contracts were grossly overpriced, and the equipment and materials supplied were either faulty or of subpar quality," I continued, laying out the evidence for everyone to see. The room was silent, the gravity of my words sinking in. I glanced at Alex, who gave me a small nod of encouragement. Furthermore, these transactions were arranged through figureheads, and it appears that personal remuneration was received for facilitating these deals. The total damage to the company amounts to more than $3 million, not to mention the severe impact on our reputation and the quality of our products. Gasps filled the room, and I saw Mr. Thompson's face harden with each word I spoke. "And who?" Mr. Thompson's voice cut through the tension. "Was responsible for these transactions?" All eyes shifted to Sarah as I said, "The evidence points to our head of procurement, Sarah Thompson." The color drained from Sarah's face as the realization of her exposure hit her. Mr. Thompson looked as if he'd been slapped, the betrayal by his own daughter a blow he hadn't seen coming. "Sarah, how could you?" Mr. Thompson's voice was a mix of anger and heartbreak. "You've not only betrayed this company, but your own family." Sarah shot up from her seat, her voice shaky, but defiant. "I did what I had to. I deserved recognition, a chance to prove myself, but all you ever cared about was Alex and now her." She spat, pointing at me. Mr. Thompson was on his feet now, his usual composure shattered. "You've done irreparable harm. I am disowning you and disinheriting you. You will face the full extent of the law for what you've done." The room erupted into chaos, with board members whispering among themselves, shock written all over their faces. The sound of police entering the room to detain Sarah was almost surreal, a stark reminder that the consequences of her actions were very real. After the storm had passed, and Sarah had been taken away, Mr. Thompson turned to me, his eyes softening. "Emma, you have done this company, and this family, a great service. You've shown a strength and integrity that is rare. Thank you." After all the dust settled and Sarah faced the music, getting slapped with an 8-year sentence, things started to shift for us. Not only did she have to cough up a chunk of change to the company for all the mess she caused, but she also had to pay me directly. Yeah, for that stunt she pulled with the earrings, trying to paint me as a thief. In the midst of all this chaos, life threw us a beautiful curveball. I gave birth to our little bundle of joy, a healthy baby who brought so much light into our lives. It was like, amidst the storm, we found our sunshine. And let me tell you, this kid has a special bond with their granddad. Whenever we visit Mr. Thompson, it's heart-melting to see them together. The old man's face lights up in a way I've never seen before. It's pure love, no two ways about it. Amidst adjusting to new motherhood and all, I took a giant leap, started my own auditing firm. Yeah, took all that mess and turned it into a mission. Now, I'm out here helping folks straighten out their books, catching mistakes, and stopping fraud before it can even start. It's tough work, but someone's gotta do it. Plus, having gone through what we did with the family company, I've got a personal score to settle with any sort of financial foul play. My first day at the company felt like walking into a storm, not knowing if I'd make it out. The place buzzed with energy, folks rushing about with papers, phones glued to their ears, and the clack of keyboards nonstop. There I was, in my new blazer, trying to blend into the chaos, feeling like a sheep lost in the city. Hey, you must be the new manager. I'm Mark, head of the department. You got a name, or should I just call you newbie? A voice cut through the noise, pulling me back to reality. I turned to face him, Mark, the guy I heard so much about. Tall, with a smirk that probably got him in and out of trouble, and eyes sharp as knives. I'm Julie, I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. And I'd prefer Julie over newbie. He laughed, a deep sound that somehow made the room seem less intimidating. Alright, Julie, let's see if you can keep up. This place waits for no one. You ready to dive in, or you gonna stand there looking scared? His blunt words stung a bit, but I knew this was the real deal. No sugarcoating, no hand-holding. I was here to make a mark, not to be coddled. I'm ready. Just show me where to start. Mark's smirk turned into a slight smile, one that said he might have underestimated me. Come on, then. I'll show you the ropes. But don't expect me to go easy on you. You'll have to earn your keep here. As we walked through the maze of desks and buzzing lights, Mark rattled off names and projects, his words a rapid fire that I struggled to catch. And another thing, don't expect everyone to play nice. This isn't kindergarten. It's a battlefield. You got the guts for it? I nodded, feeling the weight of his gaze. I didn't come here to play. I'm here to work and to win. Good answer. Let's see if you mean it. Mark led me to my new office, a small space with a window overlooking the city. It wasn't much, but it was mine. The days that followed were a blur of meetings, deadlines, and learning curves steep enough to give anyone vertigo. Mark was relentless, always pushing, always demanding more. But behind the tough exterior, I caught glimpses of something else, a teacher, maybe even a friend. Julie, this report looks like it was written by a 5-year-old. Do it again, Mark would say, tossing the papers on my desk without a second glance. Or, you're gonna let Johnson talk over you like that? Stand up for your ideas, or they'll walk all over you. It was tough love, the kind that grated but also grew on you. Mark wasn't just teaching me about the job, he was showing me how to survive in a world where you're only as good as your last success. One evening, after the office had emptied and the city lights danced in the darkness, Mark knocked on my office door, a couple of beers in hand. You did good today, Julie. Didn't think you had it in you to stand up to Johnson like that. I took the beer, our fingers brushing slightly. Thanks, Mark. Means a lot, coming from you. We sat in silence for a moment, the city's hum a backdrop to our thoughts. This place can chew you up and spit you out if you're not careful, Mark said, his voice softer than I'd ever heard. But you, I think you might just make it. Because of your tough love? I teased, taking a sip of the beer. He chuckled, leaning back in his chair. Maybe. Or maybe you're just as stubborn and hard-headed as I am. As the weeks turned into months, Mark and I found ourselves tangled in something more complicated than mentorship. Our after-hours chats turned into dinners, and those dinners turned into more. We knew the stakes, office romances were a big no-no, a taboo that could cost us both our jobs. But the heart wants what it wants, doesn't it? Julie, we're playing with fire here, Mark would whisper, his voice heavy with a mix of desire and caution, after one of our secret meetups. "I know, but I can't help it," I'd respond, my heart racing, feeling the thrill and the danger all at once. "Let's just keep this between us. No one has to know." And so, our secret affair began. We became experts at hiding our feelings in the daylight, saving them for the shadows where we could be ourselves, if only for a moment. The risk made everything more intense, but it was a game of Russian roulette. Every stolen kiss, every whispered promise, was a bullet in the chamber, and we were both playing with the trigger. Life's funny, you know? One minute, you're sneaking around, trying to hide your love like it's some kind of contraband, and the next, you're facing a moment that could change everything. That's exactly how it went down with Mark and me. It was a Thursday evening, the kind of evening that didn't seem special until it suddenly was. We were at my place, a modest apartment that had become our little sanctuary away from the prying eyes of the world. The air was filled with the smell of the spaghetti I had cooked, a simple dish, but Mark swore it was the best he'd ever had. "Julie, you know, this sneaking around is getting old," Mark said out of the blue, his fork pausing mid-air. His voice was casual, but his eyes were anything but. I chuckled, thinking he was about to crack a joke. "What do you suggest, a billboard announcing Mark and Julie's love shack?" He didn't laugh. Instead, he put his fork down and took my hand, his touch sending a familiar thrill up my arm. "I'm serious, Julie. I've been thinking. Why don't we just make this official? Marry me, Julie. Let's stop hiding." The words hit me like a bolt of lightning. Marry him? Was he serious? My heart started racing, and a part of me wanted to say yes, before my brain could catch up. But then, reality kicked in. "Mark, you know we can't. The company." "Screw the company," he cut in, his usual calm replaced with a passion I hadn't seen before. "I love you, and I'm tired of pretending like you're not the most important part of my life. We'll figure it out. We always do." His words, so raw and honest, melted any reservations I had. How could I say no to a man who was willing to risk it all for us? "Yes," I whispered, the word barely making it out, before Mark pulled me into a kiss that sealed our promise. The next day was a whirlwind. We knew we had to face the music and tell our boss about our decision. The company had strict rules about relationships in the workplace, and one of us would have to leave. But at that moment, nothing felt impossible as long as we were together. "Mr. Reynolds, we have something to tell you," Mark started, his hand gripping mine under the table as we sat across from our boss in his imposing office. Mr. Reynolds looked up from his paperwork, his gaze sharp. "I'm listening." Mark squeezed my hand, a silent source of strength, and then laid it all out. "Julie and I are getting married. We know the company's policy, and we're prepared to deal with the consequences." Mr. Reynolds didn't seem surprised. If anything, he looked like a man who had seen it all. "I appreciate your honesty. You know the rules. One of you will have to resign." Mark was quick to lay down how it was going to be, his voice firm, brooking no argument. "It's going to be Julie who resigns. I've got the career and the salary that we need to keep things going strong. She'll stay home, take care of our future." I didn't say anything at first, the weight of his words sinking in. Part of me wanted to argue, to say we should find another way. But then, the resolve in Mark's eyes told me this was the decision he believed was best for us. "All right," I said finally, my voice steady. "If that's what we've decided, then I'll resign." The ride back from Mr. Reynolds' office was quiet, both of us lost in our thoughts. Mark kept trying to reassure me, saying it was for the best, but the silence between us spoke volumes. "Julie, you know this is the right move, right? My job's the stable one. It just makes sense," Mark finally said, breaking the silence as we stood at the door of our shared future. I looked up at him, searching his face for any sign of doubt. But all I saw was certainty. "I know, Mark. It's just a big change, that's all. But we'll make it work. We always do." The honeymoon phase in our suburban home didn't last long. At first, it was all laughter and shared dreams, but then the atmosphere started to change, and not for the better. Mark began to show a side of him I hadn't seen before, a side that expected everything to be just so, perfect and without a single flaw. One evening, as I was trying to get dinner ready after spending the day cleaning the house, Mark came home early. The house smelled like the roast I had in the oven, and I thought it would cheer him up. I was wrong. "Julie, what's this?" Mark's voice cut through the quiet of the kitchen, sharp and cold. I turned to see him holding a plate with a slight frown. "It's dinner, Mark. I tried a new recipe I thought you'd like," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The tension in the air was thick enough to slice. He took a bite and immediately made a face. "This is what you call dinner? It's bland. Can't you do anything right?" He dumped the plate into the trash with a clatter that made me jump. I felt a sting of tears in my eyes, but I fought them back. "I'm sorry, Mark. I'll make something else," I murmured, turning back to the stove, my hands shaking slightly. "No, forget it. I'm not hungry anymore." His words were a dismissal, and he stormed off to the living room, leaving me alone with my failed dish and a sinking heart. But it didn't stop there. Mark's demands grew by the day. If a shirt wasn't ironed to his liking, it ended up thrown on the floor. If he found a single speck of dust, he'd make a show of wiping it up with his finger and then wave it in front of my face. "What do I keep you around for if you can't even keep the house clean?" he'd say, and each word felt like a slap. One night, he came home late to find me asleep on the couch, waiting up for him. The TV was still on, a low hum in the quiet room. He woke me up, not gently, but by snatching the blanket away. "Why are you sleeping? The house is a mess," he barked, his eyes scanning the room for any sign of disorder. I rubbed my eyes, confused and tired. "Mark, it's 2 a.m. What mess are you talking about?" He didn't answer, just stomped off to our bedroom, leaving me to wonder what I had missed. The next morning, I found a list on the kitchen counter, items he expected to be done by the time he got back. It was like living with a ticking time bomb, never knowing what would set him off next. I tried to talk to him about it one evening, tried to understand where all this was coming from. "Mark, can we talk? It feels like you're always angry with me. What's going on?" He just looked at me, cold and distant. "There's nothing to talk about. I work all day, and I expect to come home to a clean house and a decent meal. Is that too much to ask?" "But I'm trying my best," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Clearly, your best isn't good enough." And with that, he left the room, leaving me standing there, feeling smaller and more alone than ever. My attempts to stand up for myself didn't go unnoticed, but they sure didn't go unpunished either. After one particularly heated argument where I dared suggest a divorce, thinking maybe the threat of it would shake him up, he retaliated in a way I hadn't expected. "You want to play tough, Julie? Fine. Let's see how you manage without access to the bank accounts." Mark spat out, his face twisted in anger. The next day, I found out he wasn't bluffing. My card was declined at the grocery store, leaving me mortified and empty-handed. When I confronted him about it, his response chilled me to the bone. "Learn your place, Julie. You don't threaten me. You need to understand who's in charge here." Stuck in a house with dwindling supplies, I felt my independence slipping away. Mark carried on as usual, unaffected, dining out for lunch and dinner, while I was left to scrounge around for whatever was left in the pantry. Feeling desperate, I broached the topic of divorce again, hoping maybe this time it would bring some sense into him. Surprisingly, it did, but not in the way I expected. "Divorce? Are you out of your mind? Do you have any idea what that would do to my reputation?" he hissed. Yet, the day after that conversation, Mark did a complete 180. He came home with flowers, something he hadn't done since our early days, and even arranged a romantic dinner at home, just for the two of us. For a moment, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, this was the turning point. Maybe he realized what he stood to lose. Maybe this was him trying to make amends. But like a mirage, that hope vanished as quickly as it appeared. The gentle, attentive man who brought me flowers was gone, replaced once again by the cold, demanding stranger I'd come to live with. It was a cruel game of emotional whiplash, one that left me more confused and isolated than ever. Mark's parents, bless their hearts, saw none of this. To them, we were the picture-perfect couple, living out a suburban dream. Whenever they came around, I played the part, smiling and nodding, while Mark played the doting husband. But heaven forbid I slip up, show a crack in the facade. The consequences, as Mark liked to remind me, were swift. One night, after his parents left from one of their visits, Mark decided my performance hadn't been up to par. "You could have been a bit more enthusiastic tonight. My parents think we're happy, Julie. Don't ruin that," he said, his tone icy. When I tried to defend myself, to explain that I was doing my best, it only angered him more. "Your best? That's your best? Maybe you need a night on the sofa to think about what your best really means." And just like that, I found myself banished from our bedroom, lying on the sofa in the dark, wondering how my life had come to this. Winter hit hard that year, turning the streets into skating rinks overnight. I remember thinking I should be careful as I headed out to the store, but caution wasn't enough to keep me on my feet. I slipped on the ice, felt a sharp pain, and then nothing but the cold seeping through my coat as I lay there, waiting for help. Passers-by were quick to call an ambulance, and I spent the day in a blur of x-rays and doctors telling me I'd broken my leg. By the time they put me in a cast and sent me home, it was already dark. I tried calling Mark from the hospital, tried to tell him what happened, but all I got was his voicemail. So, I sent him a message and hoped he'd understand. The taxi dropped me off at our house, and I hobbled to the door, leaning heavily on my crutches. The moment Mark opened the door, I knew something was wrong. His face was twisted in anger, not concern. "Where have you been? I come home to no dinner, and you're nowhere to be found," he barked, before even greeting me. I was in shock, pain throbbing through my leg, as I tried to explain. "Mark, I broke my leg. I've been in the hospital all day. Look." I lifted the edge of my coat to show him the cast, thinking surely this would soften his anger. But it didn't. "Excuses, Julie. Always excuses with you. A broken leg is no reason for laziness," he snapped back, as if my injury was a personal inconvenience to him. Tears pricked my eyes, not just from the pain but from the utter disbelief. "Mark, I can't cook or clean properly like this. Maybe we could hire an au pair, just for the 3 months until I'm better?" His response was a laugh, short and bitter. "Spend my money because you can't do your duties? No way. You'll just have to manage." And just like that, I was left to fend for myself. Cooking was a nightmare, each step a new level of pain. Cleaning was even worse, trying to balance on crutches while wiping down surfaces and sweeping floors. Mark watched me struggle every day, offering no help, only criticism if something wasn't up to his standard. That was my breaking point. Not the fall, not the broken leg, but the realization that the man I married had so little compassion, so little love left for me. I was more than just hurt, I was broken, not just physically, but deep down where it mattered most. It was a day like any other, or so I thought, hobbling around on one leg, trying to keep the house up to Mark's impossible standards. The pain was a constant companion, but on that day, it was overshadowed by a growing sense of defiance. I'd reached my limit, fed up with the way Mark treated me, especially after the incident with the trash. I'd forgotten to take it out, a simple mistake, but Mark turned it into a spectacle. He came home, saw the full trash can, and without a word, dumped it right there on the floor next to me. "Clean it up," he ordered, his voice cold as ice. I did as he said, fighting back tears, the pain in my leg burning with each step I took to tidy his mess. That night, I couldn't sleep, thoughts racing through my head. By morning, my decision was made. I confronted him with divorce papers, my hand trembling, but my resolve firm. Mark just laughed, a sound that made my blood boil. "You think you can scare me with divorce? he scoffed, taking the papers, but not looking at them. This time I'm not scaring you, Mark. I'm serious, I said, meeting his gaze, trying to convey just how much I meant it. His laughter stopped, replaced by a smirk. Fine, I'll sign them. But let's do this properly, go to a lawyer in the city. I should have known it was too easy, too smooth. But I was desperate to be free, to end this nightmare. So, I agreed, and we drove together. Halfway there, on the highway, he pulled over, mumbling some excuse about the wheel needing air. Get out for a sec, he said. I trusted him. I got out. And then, before I could even realize what was happening, he drove off, leaving me there, alone and stranded with my broken leg in the biting cold. Panic set in, but I had to act. I called him, using the recording function on my phone, because I needed evidence, proof of this cruelty. Mark, come back. This isn't funny, I said, my voice shaking from cold and fear. His laughter crackled through the phone, icy and sharp. Facing the consequences of your decision, Julie. You want to be independent? Solve this yourself. And then he hung up. I was left standing there on the side of the road, cars whizzing by, my heart sinking. Betrayed, abandoned, but most of all, determined. That's when a car pulled up. To my surprise, it was my former boss, Mr. Reynolds, who also happened to be Mark's boss. His brow furrowed in concern as he rolled down the window. Julie, what on earth are you doing out here, especially in this condition? He asked, his voice laced with worry. I hesitated, not sure where to start or how much to share. But then, the floodgates opened. I told him everything, how Mark had been treating me, the accident, and finally, how he left me stranded on the side of the highway with a broken leg. The words poured out, raw and unfiltered. Mr. Reynolds' expression darkened with each word I said. This is unacceptable, Julie. Get in the car. We're going to sort this out, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He drove me to his office, offering me a hot coffee that warmed my hands, but couldn't touch the chill in my bones. After I settled in, he excused himself for a moment. I didn't know what he planned, but I trusted him. He returned shortly, mentioning he had invited Mark over under the guise of an urgent meeting. When Mark walked in and saw me, his face went white as a sheet. Julie? What? Sit down, Mark. We have a lot to discuss, Mr. Reynolds interrupted, his voice calm but with an edge that made Mark comply without a word. Mr. Reynolds didn't mince his words. Mark, I've been informed of your behavior, both as a husband and indirectly as an employee. It's inexcusable. I can't have someone who exhibits such cruelty on my team. You're fired. Mark tried to defend himself, throwing a panicked look my way. Julie, tell him you're exaggerating. This is just a misunderstanding. That's when I played the recording of our last conversation, the one where he laughed after abandoning me on the highway. The room fell silent as my voice and Mark's laughter filled the space. There was nothing left for him to say. He knew it, I knew it, and Mr. Reynolds knew it. Mark left the office, head hung low, the finality of the situation settling around us like a heavy cloak. Mr. Reynolds turned to me, his expression softening. Julie, I'm so sorry you went through this. If there's anything I can do. Thank you, Mr. Reynolds. Just this. Listening to me, believing me. It's more than I could have asked for, I said, the weight of the past months starting to lift ever so slightly. He nodded, understanding. You're welcome here, Julie. Take some time to heal, and if you ever want to come back, your job is waiting for you. Finally, it was over. The court didn't just grant me the divorce, they ordered Mark to pay me $100,000 for all the hell he put me through. Having that recording was a game changer. It was the undeniable proof that swung everything in my favor. When Mark's parents heard the whole story, they couldn't even look him in the eye. They came to me, all apologies and sorrowful faces. We're so sorry, Julie. We had no idea. I told them straight. You've got nothing to apologize for. It's not your fault he turned out this way. But inside, I felt a bitter sort of satisfaction knowing they saw Mark for who he really was. Losing his job was the cherry on top. Mr. Reynolds didn't waste any time showing Mark the door, and he made a point of telling me I was welcome back anytime. So, I went back to work, back to something resembling a normal life. It felt good, walking into the office, knowing I'd stood my ground and came out the other side stronger. With the divorce settlement, I rented a cozy apartment, a little place just for me. It wasn't just a new home, it was a fresh start, a place where the shadows of my marriage to Mark couldn't reach me. As the days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, the memory of Mark and all the pain he caused began to fade. I threw myself into work, into rebuilding myself and my life. I made new friends, rediscovered hobbies I'd forgotten I loved, and began to enjoy life again, on my own terms. Sometimes, colleagues would tiptoe around the subject of my divorce, but I'd just laugh it off. That chapter's closed, I'd tell them. I'm all about the next adventure now. And it was true. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control of my destiny. Mark had tried to break me, but in the end, he was just a footnote in my story, a bad memory fading into insignificance. My name's Elise, and my story isn't one of those fairy tales you're used to hearing. My dad was the king of his castle, and we were just living in it. My mom, she was more like the silent enforcer, backing up every one of Dad's rules with a nod and a look that could freeze you in place. Then there was my sister, Anna. She was older by a couple of years and had always been the rebel, trying to push the boundaries, but even she couldn't break the iron will of our father. Our home life? It was a series of do's and don'ts. Don't talk back. Do as you're told. Don't stay out late. Do your chores. The list went on and on. It wasn't just the rules, it was the cold way they were enforced. Love and warmth were scarce, replaced by a rigid discipline that stifled us. One day, Anna got caught up in a teenage dream. She met a guy, Dave, kind-hearted and with a smile that could light up the darkest days. But he made the mistake of not fitting into Dad's view of suitable. I remember the day she brought him over, all nervous and hopeful. The air was thick with tension. Dad took one look at him and the sparks flew. "What do you think you're doing, bringing this, nobody into my house?" he barked, voice booming like thunder. Anna's eyes were wide, tears brimming, but she didn't dare let them fall. She knew better than to challenge Dad openly. "Dad, please, he's a good person," she whispered, barely audible. "Good? Good doesn't pay the bills. Get him out of my sight," he spat, turning his back on them both. That night, Anna cried in silence, her dreams shattered. She didn't dare disobey Dad, and that was the end of her and Dave. It was a lesson in our harsh reality. Love wasn't about feelings, it was about fitting into the strict mold Dad had set. As for me, I watched and learned. I knew better than to get caught in the crossfire. I kept my head down, followed the rules, and counted down the days until I could escape. The day I left for college felt like my first breath of fresh air in years. The day I left for college felt like I was finally taking a sledgehammer to the chains that had bound me my whole life. My bags were packed, and I was ready to bolt out the door, but not without one last showdown with the warden, my dad. "Elise, you think you're ready for the big world out there?" Dad's voice was like gravel, tough and unyielding. He stood in the doorway, a towering figure that I was about to leave behind. "I'm more than ready, Dad. I've been ready," I shot back, my voice stronger than I felt. Inside, my stomach was doing flips, but there was no way I'd let him see that. Mom was in the background, wringing her hands, the eternal peacemaker. "Be safe, dear. Remember to call us, every day," she said, her voice trailing off as if she already knew the impossibility of her request. College was a blur of new experiences, late nights, and the kind of freedom that was intoxicating. I made friends, actual friends, who liked me for me, not because of some unspoken family obligation. One night, in our cramped little dorm, my roommate, Jess, and I were sprawled out on our beds, talking about everything and nothing at the same time. So, Elise, you ever gonna call your folks? You've been here a month, and I haven't seen you pick up the phone once, Jess asked, her tone casual but probing. I sighed, staring at the ceiling as if it held the answers. I talk to my mom now and then. But every call feels like a leash tightening around my neck. It's always, are you eating well? Are you studying hard? Remember who you are. Jess laughed, a light, easy sound. Sounds like my mom, but on steroids. They're just worried about you, you know? It's a big world out here. The college life was turning into everything I hoped it'd be, a stark contrast to the suffocating grip of my parents' house. I was finally feeling the weight lift off my shoulders, getting used to the idea of living on my own terms. Then, out of nowhere, my bubble burst when my mom decided to drop a surprise visit. I was in the middle of a laugh with Jess when there was a knock on our door. The last person I expected to see on the other side was my mother, standing there with a look that could sour milk. Elise, what is this place? It's so small, she said, her nose wrinkling as she stepped inside, eyeing Jess like she was some sort of street urchin. Jess, ever the brave soul, extended her hand. Hi, Mrs. Martin, I'm Jess. Elise's roommate. Mom looked at Jess's hand like it was covered in dirt but shook it anyway. Jess, is it? Elise, can I have a word with you, in private? The way she said in private made it sound like we were about to discuss state secrets instead of whatever she had on her mind. Once we were alone, she wasted no time. Elise, that girl, she's not the right sort of friend for you. She's vulgar, she hissed, her voice laced with disdain. I felt my cheeks burning, a mix of anger and embarrassment stewing inside me. Mom, Jess is a great person. She's been nothing but kind to me. Ignoring me, Mom began rifling through my closet, her hands moving from one piece of clothing to another with a speed born of disapproval. And these clothes? They're far too revealing. What on earth are you thinking, wearing things like this? Each word felt like a slap, stripping away the independence I'd started to build. I wanted to scream, to tell her to stop, but the words wouldn't come. All I could do was stand there, silently fuming and fighting back tears. After what felt like an eternity, Mom left, leaving a trail of silence in her wake. I collapsed on the bed, the dam finally breaking as tears streamed down my face. Jess came in soon after, sitting beside me without a word. She handed me a tissue and waited for the storm to pass. Elise, screw what your mom thinks, okay? You're awesome, and if wearing a tank top is the biggest of your sins, then you're practically a saint, Jess said, her voice a mix of anger and comfort. You're your own person, Elise. Don't forget that. Her words, simple and straightforward, were like a beacon in the fog. Jess was right. I was my own person, and it was high time I started living like one. After college, I landed a job in a big company known for its semi-finished meat products. The boss, Michael, was this young guy, grandson of the founder. Kind of hot, if I'm being honest, but in a I've got my life together kind of way, which was intimidating and attractive all at once. One day, he called me into his office. My heart was racing, thinking I'd messed up a report or something. Elise, can you come in here for a second? His voice was calm but carried across the sales floor like he was announcing the next big product launch. I walked in, trying to look confident but probably failing miserably. Yes, Michael? He was leaning back in his chair, reports scattered across his desk. I've been reviewing your work. You've got an eye for detail. Impressive, he said, his eyes not leaving the papers. I didn't know where to look. Was this a compliment or the prelude to a but? Thank you, I try my best, I managed to say, feeling my face heat up. No, thank you. It's refreshing to see someone take their work seriously around here. Keep it up, he said, finally looking up with a smile that made my knees weak. Fast forward a few months, Michael got transferred to another department. We barely saw each other, which was probably for the best. I mean, dating your boss? That's a recipe for disaster, right? Then, as fate would have it, we bumped into each other at the supermarket. I was inspecting some sad-looking avocados when I heard his voice. "Finding anything good?" I turned around, and there he was, casually dressed, which was a stark contrast to the suits I was used to seeing him in. "Michael. Hi. Just, trying to decide if these avocados are worth it," I stammered, feeling like a complete idiot. He laughed, a sound that was way too charming. "Let me give you a tip. This one," he picked up an avocado, "is perfect. See? Firm, but not too hard." We ended up talking more about fruits and vegetables than I ever thought possible. One thing led to another, and we found ourselves having dinner together. It was casual, easy conversation that felt like we were just two people getting to know each other, not an employee and her boss. After that night, things changed. We started seeing each other outside of work, keeping it on the down low, of course. It was nice, comfortable. But I couldn't shake off the fear of what my parents would think, so I kept it a secret from them. A year flew by with Michael, each day feeling like a step further away from my old life and closer to something that was entirely ours. One chilly evening in November, Michael took me out for what I thought was just another date night. We ended up at this quaint little spot downtown that had the best view of the city. It was more romantic than our usual hangouts, and I should have guessed something was up. As we sat there, looking over the city lights, he got all serious, which wasn't like him. "Elise, these past months with you have been incredible. You've shown me what it really means to be in love," he started, his voice steady, but I could tell he was nervous. I was caught off guard. "Michael, what's going on?" My heart started racing, not sure what to expect. He took a deep breath, reached into his pocket, and before I knew it, he was down on one knee, holding the most beautiful ring I'd ever seen. "Elise, will you marry me?" My heart stopped. This was it, the moment I'd dreamed about but never really thought would happen, at least not under these circumstances. "Yes, Michael, 1,000,000 times yes," I managed to say, tears of joy blurring my vision. The euphoria of our engagement was overwhelming, but it was short-lived. The thought of telling my parents loomed over us like a dark cloud. I knew I couldn't keep this a secret forever. The fear of their reaction was paralyzing, but Michael was supportive, encouraging even. "We should tell them, Elise. It's the right thing to do," he said one night as we were discussing, more like avoiding, the subject. The day we decided to tell my parents, my stomach was in knots. We drove to their house, the silence in the car heavy with unsaid fears and unasked questions. Sitting across from my parents in the living room felt like being in a courtroom, waiting for the judge's final verdict. "Mom, Dad, we have something to tell you. Michael and we're engaged," I blurted out, not trusting myself to build up to it gently. First, there was shock, then a frosty sort of acceptance once they learned Michael wasn't just some guy, but a guy with a hefty bank account. The real drama unfolded when Mom started laying out her grand plan for the wedding. "We need to have it in the church, with all the trimmings. It'll be magnificent," she said, her eyes already picturing the event. I could feel my dream of a simple, intimate wedding slipping through my fingers. Mom, Michael and I were thinking something low-key. Just sign the papers and have a small party. "That's it," I said, hoping to steer her away from her grand designs. Her reaction was as if I'd suggested we get married in a fast food joint. "Unacceptable. A girl's wedding day is her most special day. I'll take care of everything. Don't you worry," she said, dismissing my wishes with a wave of her hand. I felt my temper flare. "But it's our wedding, shouldn't we get to decide how we want it?" I protested, but Dad cut me off mid-sentence. "If you don't do it this way, you might as well not do it at all. No blessing from us," he said, his tone final, leaving no room for argument. Michael had been quiet up till now, trying to keep the peace. But even he seemed to falter under the weight of their expectations. "Maybe we should just go along with it, Elise," he whispered to me, a hint of defeat in his voice. I couldn't believe my ears. Betrayal stung me, sharp and unexpected, from the man I'd just agreed to marry. My parents, seeing his compliance, practically beamed with victory. The ride back from their place was heavy with my disappointment. But as soon as we were alone, Michael took my hands in his. Listen, Elise, I only said that to calm things down. We're not doing it their way. We're doing it our way, okay? Let them think what they want for now, he said, his voice firm, his eyes telling me he meant every word. I was in the middle of discussing cake flavors over the phone with Michael when the doorbell rang. The moment I opened the box, my heart sank. It was for me, a wedding dress. But not just any dress. It was the epitome of what I never wanted in a wedding gown. Layers upon layers of tulle, a bodice that looked more like armor, and a train that seemed long enough to cover a football field. It was horrendous. Staring in disbelief, I called Michael back, panic edging my voice. You won't believe this. My mom sent over a wedding dress. It's like a cake topper from the 80s got turned into a dress. Michael's laugh did little to soothe my rising hysteria. Maybe it's not that bad? Try it on? Try it on? Michael, this thing has its own zip code. It's a disaster. I shot back, the image of me drowning in layers of lace burning in my mind. Before I could spiral further, I decided to confront my mom. Dialing with trembling fingers, I braced myself for the inevitable showdown. Mom, why did you send me a wedding dress? We talked about this. Michael and I are doing things our way, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. There was a pause on the other end, and then, Elise, darling, that dress is a masterpiece. It's what every girl dreams of. You'll thank me. A masterpiece? Mom, it's not me. It's not us. We want simple, remember? My patience was thinning, each word a struggle to maintain civility. Simple is for table settings, not weddings. You'll wear it, and you'll look beautiful, she retorted, her voice leaving no room for argument. Elise, listen to me. Your father and I have already taken care of everything. The hall is booked, and plans are set. You're going to have the wedding every girl dreams of. Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. What do you mean, everything's set? Michael and I haven't agreed to any of this. I could feel my voice rising, a mix of anger and disbelief swirling inside me. It's done, Elise. We've even sent out the guest list. It's going to be a beautiful event, she said, her tone final, cutting off any avenue for protest. I hung up, feeling defeated and betrayed. It felt like I was being steamrolled into someone else's version of my wedding. When I relayed the conversation to Michael, his face fell. Yeah, your mom called me. She insisted I cover half of the budget she's drawn up. Sent me the bill, the hall address, and some wedding design proposal, he admitted, looking like he'd swallowed something sour. And the guest list, she sent that to you too? I asked, dreading the answer. Michael nodded. Yeah, it's packed with people I've never met. And I didn't see any of your relatives on it. Your mom mentioned something about keeping it exclusive. The realization that my parents were orchestrating a wedding that catered to their social circle, sidelining our wishes, and even my own family, was too much. Tears streamed down my face as the enormity of their manipulation sank in. Seeing me crumble, Michael wrapped his arms around me. Hey, we're not going to let this happen. We'll have our wedding, our way. Just us, our friends, and whoever we want. No dictates, no lists. Let's do it secretly, the way we want. I needed an ally, someone who could understand the madness of defying our parents on such a grand scale. Naturally, my thoughts turned to Anna, my sister, the one person who'd always understood the weight of our parents' expectations. So, I called her up, heart pounding with a mix of excitement and fear. Anna, I need you to be super chill about what I'm about to tell you. Michael and we're planning a do-over. A real wedding that's all about us, no parental strings attached. I spilled, the words tumbling out in a rush. Her response was immediate, a mix of shock and awe. Holy smokes, Elise. That's huge. I'm in. What do you need from me? Relief washed over me. We're thinking something simple, outdoors. Just love, laughter, and the people who really matter. No drama, no spectacle. Can you help keep the lid on this? It's top secret. Consider it locked down. I'm so proud of you, Elise. It's about time you took your life back from them, Anna said, her voice brimming with excitement and a touch of mischief. With Anna's help, we started planning in earnest. Invitations went out, with a clear, almost spy-like message. This is a covert operation. Do not, under any circumstances, let the rents know. Our friends and family were in. The buzz of excitement was palpable, a shared secret that bound us all together in a way I'd never experienced before. Then came the call from Aunt Clara, a relative I hadn't expected to hear from. Elise, darling, I got your invitation. Your mother hasn't stopped going on about some lavish affair, but I knew something was up. You're doing the right thing, love. Don't worry, my lips are sealed. Heaven knows she didn't want me at her version of your wedding anyway. Said I didn't fit the guest list aesthetic. Her words, so full of support and understanding, bolstered my resolve. This was more than a wedding, it was a statement, a reclaiming of our choices, our voices. The week leading up to the official wedding, my parents' version, was a masterclass in acting. Michael and I went through the motions, nodding along to plans, tasting cakes that tasted like cardboard, and smiling through gritted teeth. It was a performance worthy of an award, but our eyes were on the prize. Then, on a day not our wedding, as not our guests gathered at some impersonal hall, Michael and I were boarding a plane to Bali, our hearts light, free from the weight of expectations. Bali was everything we wanted, intimate, breathtakingly beautiful, and so us. We exchanged vows near a waterfall, the sound of rushing water a perfect backdrop to our promises of forever. After our secret wedding in Bali, the reality of facing the fallout with my parents was a cloud hanging over our return. I knew the storm was brewing, it was only a matter of time before it broke. The first call came from Anna, who was both excited and nervous for us. You guys back yet? The hurricane's about to hit land here, she said, her voice a mix of amusement and concern. Yeah, we just landed. How bad is it? I braced myself for the impact, clutching the phone like a lifeline. Mom and Dad are on the warpath. They found out about Bali when they tried calling you to berate you for being late to your own wedding. When they realized where you were, all hell broke loose, Anna explained, the words tumbling out in a hurried whisper. Dialing my parents' number felt like the longest few seconds of my life. The phone rang twice before my mom's voice came through, icy and sharp. Elise, where do you think you've been? Do you have any idea of the embarrassment you've caused us? Mom, I'm sorry you feel embarrassed, but this was about what Michael and I wanted. We needed our wedding to be true to us, not a spectacle, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Dad thinks we should cut you off, you know. After this stunt, maybe he's right, she added, the threat hanging in the air like a guillotine. The anger in her words was palpable, but so was the conviction in my response. If that's what you think is best, then so be it. But Michael and I made a choice for our happiness. I wish you could be happy for us. The line went dead, her silence a clear indication of the breach that had formed between us. The aftermath was a mix of relief and sorrow. Relief that Michael and I had followed our hearts, but sorrow for the rift that now lay between my family and me. As the day of our real celebration drew closer, a gnawing worry kept me up at night, the fear of my parents crashing the party, hell-bent on making a scene. Michael, ever the rock, saw the turmoil I was in and came up with a solution. Let's get some security. Keep the drama at the gate. This day's about us, not them, he said, his decision firm, leaving no room for argument. The day of the party was nothing short of magical. We chose a minimalist outdoor style for the celebration, with simple, elegant decorations that complemented the natural beauty around us. As dusk fell, electric garlands lit up the venue, casting a warm glow over the faces of our friends and relatives. It was like something out of a dream. Standing beside Michael, both of us dressed to the nines, I felt a surge of happiness so intense it was almost overwhelming. Our guests came up to us, one by one, showering us with congratulations and warm wishes. Anna was beaming, her happiness for us clear as day, while Aunt Clara, bless her heart, kept me in a tight hug before pulling me into every dance. The night was perfect, a true celebration of our love and the life we were building together. But then, the inevitable happened. Word got to me through one of the security guys that my parents had shown up, determined to force their way in. My heart sank. I had hoped it wouldn't come to this. Michael squeezed my hand, a silent vow that we'd face this together. I approached the entrance, where my parents stood, arguing with the security. "This is my daughter's wedding. You can't keep me out," my dad bellowed, his face red with anger. "Please, you need to leave. You weren't invited. I made it clear, no drama today," I said, my voice steady though my heart was racing. My mom tried to push past the security, her eyes blazing. "You can't do this to us. We're your parents." But the security held firm, a gentle but unyielding barrier between us and them. "I don't want to have to call the police, but I will if I have to. Please, just go," I said, the finality in my voice surprising even me. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of joy and celebration. Every dance, every laugh, every shared look with Michael reaffirmed my belief that we had made the right choice. We were happy, truly happy, surrounded by the people who mattered most.